roasted. What can I get you?
Deer are such strange creatures, aren't they? They eat grass, taste delicious, go crazy from wasting disease, and now they're spreading ticks that cause you to be allergic to meat for the rest of your life. Poor things have gone from beautiful critters to creepy creatures within a decade. Because of that, we've had to discontinue our deer egg and cheese biscuits because it's just too risky. Luckily for you, I can still tell you about today's scary work stories, featuring such creepy deer, dog-sitting disasters, and the most disturbing forest in America. These are tales from the break room, and you should follow and review us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Thank you. Dog sitting in a haunted house, from Cricket Girl 20. I recently began dog sitting for a family friend, only doing so when she's at her part-time job. One day, while I was dog sitting, her dog Pepper was lying on the couch next to me, while the other dog, Ray Ray, was lying on the floor next to my dog Bear. Suddenly, I heard a thud coming from the upstairs bathroom. All three dogs perked their heads up, and I stood up to go check. I didn't find anything out of place in the bathroom, so I simply told myself, take it easy, you're in a house you've never been in before. Despite being a firm believer in the paranormal, I did not want to entertain the idea of a ghost. As I returned to the living room, I noticed a dark shadow dart across the wall. I rubbed my eyes and said, snap out of it. To my relief, the rest of the day passed by without any further incidents, and my friend returned a few hours later. 2 days after that, I found myself once again taking care of her dogs. As I sat on the couch, my gaze shifted towards the TV screen, and to my surprise, I saw a figure standing beside the couch in the reflection. Startled, I quickly turned my head, only to find nothing there. Still refusing to entertain the thought of a ghost, I chose to ignore it and distract myself by watching YouTube videos about dogs. After some time, I decided to get a glass of water. I made my way towards the kitchen, and I suddenly heard a faint humming sound coming from the laundry room. Now I was frustrated. I couldn't help but shout out, "Could you please just stop?" I was surprised yet relieved when the humming ceased, so I returned to the couch, patiently waiting for my friend's return.
I wish we could count on Congressman Scott Perry.
Good morning, gamers. Today, I'm going to show you how to build the best storage system in Minecraft. This farm automatically sorts all your items quickly and quietly. It is easy to expand the storage for each item, and if you want to remove or add more items to the system, it's also super easy. In this tutorial, we'll be making a storage system to sort out 8 different items. Here are the materials.
week after that, I encountered the most terrifying incident at her residence. While preparing a snack for myself, I noticed a candle slowly moving across the counter all on its own. Just in time, I resumed enjoying my snack and returned to the living room. However, my peace was disrupted by thumping sounds emanating from the storage room. Annoyed by all this unusual activity, I decided to investigate. As I approached the storage room, I forcefully swung the door open and was startled to find a man vigorously hammering the wall. I was paralyzed with fear, and it was only when I heard the barking and snarling of the dogs behind me that I realized they were there. Suddenly, the man just vanished into thin air. I was filled with horror. I rushed back to the living room, where I encountered my friend. Curious about my distress, she inquired, "What happened?" I proceeded to recount the strange experiences I'd been having in her house. With a sigh, she admitted to me, "I'm so sorry. I should have informed you that this house is haunted. Occasionally, I hear noises and catch glimpses of shadows, but I've never seen this man you described. Pepper and Ray Ray sometimes react to something as well, something that I don't or can't see." She embraced me and apologized once again. Eventually, I stopped dog-sitting for her, as she made the decision to return home due to her mother's illness. Despite this, we still maintain contact, and she continues to express remorse for subjecting me to such unsettling experiences. I've never disclosed to my friend the words that man spoke before he vanished. Yes, he said something. He uttered,
"She made me do it. She made me with this hammer."
Subsequently, I began inquiring about the history of the house, and a man informed me that his great-uncle and aunt actually resided there in the 1940s. One day, his great-aunt infuriated him to such an extent that his great-uncle, in a fit of rage, took her life using an old-fashioned hammer. Following this tragic incident, his great-uncle penned a note absolving himself of blame, stating that she had coerced him into committing the act. He then consumed poison to bring about his own demise. Therefore, the man I witnessed must have been the great-uncle. I immediately contacted my friend and told her what I found out. She was unnerved and expressed even more regret, mostly for the aunt. Every time my friend comes over, she passes by the house occasionally and still feels a shiver just from glancing at it. She mentioned that the house appears deserted, except for a few stray cats who have made it their home. One day, she decided to step out of her car to sneak a peek inside through the window, only to spot a dark shadow standing in the living room. Startled, she quickly ran back to her car and drove away. For those listening or reading, I would recommend doing some research on the history of any home you plan to move into, especially if you have a belief in the paranormal. Landlords and realtors may not always disclose if any negative incidents occurred in the house. Additionally, it's important to pay attention to your pet's behavior, as they may react to things that are invisible or inaudible to you. Animals tend to be more sensitive to paranormal activities compared to us humans. Prioritize your safety and ensure there are no negative occurrences associated with the house before embarking on any remodeling projects for your new home. I should have listened, but I didn't. From Jason R. I should have listened, not just to my wife or the law, but to myself. I knew better than to tempt fate, but I went someplace I shouldn't have. I'd almost promised myself that my days as an amateur cryptid hunter had come to an end, but then an opportunity presented itself that I simply could not pass up. I should have, but stupidly, I did not. I want to start by saying I'm going to limit the number of details and specific information I provide because I did break the law. Anyone that does a little bit of research or is remotely into strange happenings and the unexplained will probably know where I went. But no one wants to dig up details when all they are looking for is a spooky story. So I'll share some of the basic details before I tell you how it all went horrifically wrong. Ever since I retired in 2022, I've sought out a new career, one that would allow me to pursue my passion for strange events and bizarre creatures that lurk in the dark. After some recent events, I have given up on this line of work and have tossed the drafts of my book. In the northeast of the US, there is a ghost town that lies hidden in the shadows of cold mountains and damp apple orchards. But it wasn't always this way. Once it was vibrant and full of people. However, that time has long since passed. Now it's a crumbling ruin, one that's been almost completely erased from history. It wasn't a downturn in the economy or the installation of a new highway that steered people away from living here. I discovered a laundry list's worth of reasons why people cleared out, ranging from the wild and bizarre like spirits or monsters and curses, to the more mundane like lead poisoning. Now, when I say crumbling, what I mean is that all that's left is a few buried foundations and the holes of where wells had once been. The place was settled only a couple decades before the American Revolutionary War kicked off. At first, the town was owned by one man, who never seemed to actually live there. Before long, however, another brave soul decided to actually put down roots in the region. He, in turn, invited his relatives to come join him. And that's when everything started to go wrong. You see, the trio of brothers had been involved in a treacherous plot back across the pond, one which cursed their family for all time. This curse was simple enough. Their family would never know any peace. They and their descendants would spend their lives in terror before meeting untimely deaths. Even before they left for the new world, tragedy struck time and time again. A little thing like a trip across the Atlantic couldn't save them, could it? Some say that the brothers were not cursed at all, but rather, they moved onto land that was stained with some unknown and supernatural evil. I visited Virginia in search of this idiotic-sounding bunny man cryptid. What I found instead of a psychic rabbit was a town that was just wrong. It was like the area was covered in a bloody stain that could not be removed. I think that the place I'm telling you about now is similar to that, but worse. Like much of the region, the private property on which the old town once stood is overgrown with trees and brush. There are rocks and boulders everywhere you go. You can pick out the area where the town once stood by its semi-level nature. Again, I don't want to mention the place by name, but it couldn't have been given a more foreboding moniker if the people who once lived there tried. Anyway, back to today's history lesson in misery. As families are wont to do, the brothers got married, and their family expanded into a small community. Now, I mentioned that the area is covered in trees, but this doesn't adequately describe just how dense the foliage is. It's like sunset takes place in the middle of the day. I found it surprising that several families would join those who helped settle the region, but they did, and more people moved deep into the hills of this cold land. The town, I think I'll just refer to it as the town, to make the anonymity somewhat easier, was never what one would call lucky. Besides the deaths, there were the others. You see, there were these mysterious creatures, sometimes spotted just beyond the tree line, and wherever they were seen, madness soon followed. Cynics will try and tell you that illness, death, and people losing their minds happen every day at all points across the globe, and they're right to say that. But when it came to the town, the numbers far exceeded virtually every other town in the US at that time, and ever since. For reasons that have not been explained, several of the town's original settlers moved away. They went on to have rather boring lives before passing away of natural causes. When I discovered this, it kinda convinced me that whatever was going on up here, it wasn't a curse. But one settler, I'll call him Mr. J, stayed behind. And he went mad before eventually becoming destitute and living on the charity of those who still remained in the small community. This all took place prior to the beginning of the 19th century. The spread of madness continued as the dying began. As he descended into madness, Mr. J's good friend, Mr. G, was killed at his neighbor's house. His neighbor in turn also went insane. But before he lost his mind and succumbed to madness's embrace, the neighbor began speaking of strange creatures that he allegedly saw lurking out in the dense forest. He said, at night, these mysterious beings would emerge from the undergrowth and stalk the surrounding woodland. But more on them later. For now, I'd like to provide you with a summary of some of the other events that took place within the space of about 18 years. One family was totally wiped out during a Native American raid. Plagues swept through the area, killing off large portions of the population. One woman was struck dead by a lightning bolt, of all things, on her own front porch. And other horrific events took place with a deadly frequency that no other town could match. While all this hell was taking place, more and more people began to lose their minds. Only as time progressed, things took an ominous turn. When their minds finally broke, they began wandering off into the woods. One strange event is nothing, just an anomaly, right? Twice is a little stranger. But as time went on, more and more people disappeared into the forest, never to be seen again. The surviving members of the town simply could not handle all the bizarre happenings that were devouring their community. So, they began to leave. I always try to be fair whenever I research any location, and the town is built in a rocky, wet notch of land where it's hard to grow enough food to support a large population. I'm fairly certain this had a large part to play in the village's abandonment. Now that the town only had a handful of residents, it seemed as if whatever was consuming the area fixated on those who still remained, with an ever-growing hunger. Despite everything, one person, Mr. B, chose to remain with his family. It was a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his days, which turned out to be few. Not long after he made the decision they would stay, his wife died. And shortly after she was laid to rest, his children wandered out into those cursed woods. They too were never seen again. But the darkness was not through with Mr. B. Oh no. His house caught fire and burned to the ground. It was likely too much for him to bear. Maybe he just wanted to be with his kids and family again. Maybe the entities in the forest had finally gotten around to him. Whatever it was, Mr. B joined so many others, vanishing without a trace into the dark groves clustered around the town. At the start of the 20th century, the town had been officially deserted. The houses there began to rot and sink into the ground. The forests had finally succeeded in taking back what belonged to them. A Mr. C and his wife were a well-to-do couple who fell in love with the area and decided to build a home there. The first signs of trouble appeared when they tried to get builders to come in and build their dream home. All of the men he reached out to flat out refused. If only Mr. C had listened to the voices that were surely all but shouting in his head at this strange behavior, things could have been different. Sadly, he didn't listen. He was an intelligent man, sure, a surgeon in fact, so he likely would have deduced that something was off. But rather than be dissuaded, he bought about 1,000 acres of land and began building his dream home by himself. In the end, as the cliché goes, it would transform from a dream into a nightmare. As I mentioned earlier, the couple planned on using the home as a getaway, a place where they could spend free weekends or a summer. Well, during one summer, Mr. C got called back to the big city for an emergency operation. Bidding his wife goodbye with promises he'd be back as soon as he could, he headed off to work. A day and a half passed. It had only been 36 hours. When he returned to the outer fringes of the forest, things felt immediately off. The night birds and owls, who'd once provided their little getaway with a cozy charm, now seemed to be threatening to claim his very soul. Everything screamed at him to get out. He ignored the feeling and went to check on his wife. Why hadn't she met him at the train station or even on the road? If the legends are to be believed, the answer was simple. They had come for her. Just like many others, whatever calls those woods home found her, alone and unprotected, in her home. Like so many others, they drove her mad. Mr. C found his wife curled into a ball near their bed, laughing crazily. Again, this is coming from other sources, so take it with a grain of salt. But apparently, she'd been laughing so hard that her face had been stretched into an unnatural rictus grin. Terrified, Mr. C fled in search of help. He returned a short time later with emergency personnel. They retrieved his wife and brought her to the nearest hospital. Between her fits of deranged laughter, she told them that strange creatures had come out of the forest and attacked her. And just like many, many other townsfolk before her, whatever was in those woods drove her mad. Not too long later, she took her own life. The good doctor would go on to remarry. He, his new wife, friends, and local landowners formed a society to both protect the land and to ensure it would never be developed. Since then, tales of strange lights in the woods, apparitions that reach out to touch, shove, and attack unwary travelers, and, as always, unnatural beings wandering through the woods, became rampant. And wherever these stories pop up, the madness soon follows. Maybe that's what convinced me, or deluded is probably the better word, to steer far off the course my wife and I were on, to sneak onto private property to have a look around. Yes, I know. Stupid, right? But it all began as a quick peek into what sounded like the mines of Moria. No big deal. What it became was something far more horrific than I could have ever imagined. God only knows why, but my wife loves me, so she made sure there was someone along for the ride to protect her dim-witted husband. My wife and I picked up a little German Shepherd puppy a while back. We named him Fievel. Yes, I know that's the name of a cartoon mouse, but it fit him somehow. Anyway, she sent me on my way with our happy little pooch and a kiss. Excluding having a wet nose occasionally shoved into my face or rubbed onto my hand, the first leg of the trip was pretty nice. The winding roads are idyllic, if lonely. As I said before, the tree cover is unimaginably thick where we were at. It was only 11 a.m., but it felt like it was 8 at night. The temperatures seemed to drop the further we ventured in. Even more troubling was how Fievel started to behave. He went from slobbering and panting happily to nervously twitching around, tucking his head below the dash. I didn't notice this until later, actually. My mind was too focused on finding the boogeyman to notice at the time. But after what happened, later, I realized he was scared. Sure enough, we got to where we were heading. And by where we were heading, I mean I got out of the car every so often and wandered around a bit, before getting back in the car and driving further down the winding road. Now, this is the part of the story where I'm supposed to say that Fievel became more agitated the further we went. Except that's not what happened. No, once the little guy got quiet, he stayed that way. I should have listened to what he wasn't saying, but I didn't. Like I said, it's dark out there, and the further we went, the darker it seemed to get. That's why it was so easy to see the lights. People always describe eyeshine of whatever monster that they'd caught sight of as having glowing red or yellow eyes. At first, I wasn't even sure what I was looking at. For a moment, I considered that they might be lightning bugs. But then I reminded myself, lightning bugs give off a greenish-yellow glow. But they were blue. And before anyone suggests they were eyeshine, at that time I wasn't shining a light, and they were off to either side of the road. The one thing I forgot to mention is that some accounts say that something else has seeped into the town. Lead. Either that or some other toxic substance. This would explain the madness, the visions of strange apparitions, and so on. As terrible as that is, and as perfect an explanation as it could be, it doesn't account for the people who did not spend a lot of time there, and it doesn't account for what happened to Fievel and myself. I promised myself that I'd file this event away in the darkest part of my mind, forever. But most of you, just like me, probably frequent other channels that post scary true stories. I saw a story about blue-eyed devils. I thought other people have experienced the same thing I did. Unfortunately, the video detailed Sasquatch spotted on Edwards Air Force Base. This isn't what we encountered, not by a long shot. But that video was what motivated me to finally write down what happened to Fievel and me. "What's wrong, boy?" I asked my forlorn little friend. He didn't make a sound. Occasionally, he would flick his head this way and that, before finally staring out the passenger side window. Fievel's silence became so unnerving, I was finally starting to think about turning us around. It was around this time that I became aware of something fluttering at the back of my mind. A yearning or desire? I'm not sure what it was. I only knew that I wanted to go outside for a walk. So I stopped the car. I opened the door, and I went out for a stroll. I only know this because 15 or so minutes later, I found myself walking along the roadside. I'm not sure what snapped me out of my trance. Was it my phone? Maybe a call or text came in and the beep snapped me out of it? My feet felt wet, which is what prompted me to look down. From the knees down, I was splattered in mud. What the heck happened to me? I thought. I didn't have any answers or guesses. All I knew was I wanted to get out of there as fast as possible. The one stroke of good luck I had throughout all of this was I knew which direction to take to get back to my car. I sprinted until it felt like my lungs would burst before I caught sight of my car's dim lights flickering off in the distance. Seeing their brief glow filled me with hope, and I started to run even faster. Somewhere mid-stride, I realized that Fievel had not come with me, so I ran even faster than that. But it was already too late. As it stands, this story is probably going to cause Darkness Prevails more than a few problems, given what happened to the town's former residents. I'm not sure he can even use it, so I'm going to try to make what I found back at my car as safe as I can. Warning to those who are animal lovers, and those sensitive to violent imagery. I found my dog. Something had gotten hold of the poor boy and torn him to pieces. There was blood everywhere I looked. My little Fievel had never given us anything but love, and I had led him here to this unholy tract of misery. I don't know what came over me at that moment. I kept thinking about what had befallen so many people who had come to this miserable place. Did I? Yes, for a moment I thought I might have been the one responsible for my dog's death. But my hands, my physical hands, were clean. I couldn't find any blood or bruises or scratches. But I couldn't go back to my wife in the state my car or myself was in. So I used the handy wipes I kept in our automobile to clean up our car. It kept getting colder, But after all of this, I was immune to it. The cold was the last thought on my mind. I just kept wiping and crying. Every time I came across another piece, I would pick it up and place it in a tarpaulin we had in the trunk. I searched for a good long while. I think I found most of him. I wanted so badly to bury his little body, but the cursed ground out in that vile place seemed to be made of nothing but cold stone. I sought out and found a depression in the ground and placed his gentle form inside before covering it with rocks. It took me about an hour or so. By the time I was finished, it was night. I started to cry again, but I knew I had already spent far, far too much time in this god-forsaken pit. I got ready to turn the car on when I looked up, and there they were, blue eyes staring back at me. Not 1, 2, or even 10. When I was done counting, I found 14 pairs of little blue lights. I slammed the car into reverse and spun around as fast as the little hybrid could manage. Modern cars are far quieter than their older ancestors. I could swear I heard laughter and screams over the gentle hum of my engine. Once I cleared the woodline, my phone actually did ring. It was my wife. I had no idea what I was going to tell her. How could I possibly explain this horror to her? She is such a gentle soul, and through my negligence and stupidity, I had taken something precious from her. "What do you mean he's gone? Where is he? What have you done to—" She stopped herself from saying what she was thinking. Instead, she gave me a look that I will never forget or recover from. It wasn't exactly rage, sadness, or confusion. The look on her face was sheer disappointment, and it was clear she no longer trusted me. We returned home without our little friend, our Fievel. Things are different now. The warmth is gone. It's almost like the coldness I discovered up north followed us and took up residence in our home, and it's all my fault. Every so often I'll catch her looking at me out of the corner of my eye. I've taken to sleeping on the couch more and more often. The closeness we once held for each other is no longer there. But that's not the worst of it. I catch myself thinking about going back, not because I want to visit the shabby grave, the one I made for Fievel, but because I want to walk in those woods again. For those of you who know the place I am discussing and are considering scheduling a trip of your own there, don't do it. Stay home. If you must go to some mysterious site, pick the Northwest or Skinwalker Ranch or any place but where I was foolish enough to go. When I first set out, I thought this was my job, a new, exciting journey I was undertaking that could lead me to a career as a paranormal investigator or an author. I know better now. This wasn't some job or hobby I was undertaking. It was a fool's journey that led to the death of my best little friend. Even if my wife one day forgives me, I will never forgive myself.
It's a new year, and it's time to get your picks in 26 with Bob's Discount Furniture. Shop Bob's for hot new styles featuring the latest technology, like stylish sleeper sectionals with immersive Bluetooth audio, relaxing reclining sofas with LED lighting, and fabulous fireplaces with mood lighting and speakers. All at Bob's everyday low prices, of course. So if you want to refresh your room for less, save big by stopping.
When Deer Hunt Dogs, from Sarah M.J. For the last few years, I've been babysitting for this family named the Morgans, ever since their daughter Ellie was born. The Morgans are friends of my family. To me, they're like extended relatives, rather than employers or friends. The arrangement I have with them is great. They usually call me whenever they need a date night or had to work late, and I'd come over to watch Ellie and take care of their 2 dogs, named Moose and Sadie. Moose is a chocolate lab with more energy than sense, and Sadie is a border collie who's probably smarter than me. The best part about babysitting for the Morgans was that they have this beautiful 2-story colonial tucked back on about 2 acres of property. Their backyard is huge, bordered by dense woods on 3 sides, with an 8-foot privacy fence separating their manicured lawn from the wild forest beyond that. I always loved babysitting there. Ellie was one of those eerily quiet toddlers who would play contentedly with her blocks for hours, and the property was just gorgeous. During the day, if you're on the other side of that privacy fence for whatever reason, you could usually spot or hear deer grazing at the tree line, sometimes as many as 6 or 7 at a time. The place was peaceful. That was before a certain spring. The first time I heard the howling, I had just put Ellie down for the night. It was around 8:30 p.m., still light enough outside that the shadows weren't too deep yet. I was letting Moose and Sadie out for their evening bathroom break when I heard the howl, which didn't sound like any coyote or wolf or dog I'd ever heard before. Didn't even sound like it came from the same family of vocal cords. Needless to say, it chilled me to the bone when I heard it. Moose and Sadie froze mid-step, and I saw their ears pin back. Then Sadie let out a low whine. "Come on, guys," I called nervously, keeping my voice low. "Do y'all's thing and we'll go back in." They hurried through their routine as if they understood me, both of them staying very close to the porch. When the howl came again, echoing through the trees, I didn't wait for them to finish. I just said, "Let's go, inside." Back inside, warm and safe, I just told myself it was a wild dog, or at worst a strange coyote. Deep woods like this can make things sound kind of weird, don't they? I mean, I'd grown up in the suburbs, so I'm not exactly a wilderness expert. By the time Mr. and Mrs. Morgan came home at 11, I'd almost convinced myself I'd imagined how unsettling it had been. The second time I babysat after that initial incident, I, of course, heard it again. And this time, it seemed closer. The Morgans had asked me to let the dogs out every couple of hours throughout the evening. Moose had a weak bladder, bless his heart. Ellie had been a dream as usual, falling asleep by 7:30. I'd taken the dogs out at 8 with no issues. At 10 o'clock, I felt a little nervous for some reason. The moment we stepped onto the back porch, both dogs went all stiff. The howl came almost right away, much closer than ever before. If I had to guess, about 50 yards in the woods. It was followed by another sound, something like a grunt and wheeze mixed together, and it made my skin crawl. "All right, change of plans," I muttered, beckoning the dogs back toward the door. "You two can just hold it for a while." But Moose, being Moose, had already started down the porch steps. That's when I made my first real mistake. I let him go. Maybe I thought he would do his business quickly and come back. Maybe I was too focused on that horrid sound coming from the forest. Whatever the reason, I stood there at the door with Sadie while Moose trotted out into the yard. And then I heard the crack of wood, the rustle of leaves, and Moose's sharp yelp of pain, all in under a second. I ran. God help me, I ran out into that dark yard without even thinking. Sadie was barking frantically behind me, still standing on the porch, too afraid to come out here. My phone's flashlight swept across the lawn until I finally saw Moose. He was limping near the back fence and whimpering. But that's not the only thing I saw. A massive buck, easily one of the largest I'd ever seen in my life, was in the process of clearing that 8-foot privacy fence. No trouble at all. It jumped with a grace and power that seemed impossible for an animal that size. For just a second, as it reached the top of the fence, it turned its head, and it looked directly at me. I'll never forget the way those eyes looked. I swear they had no eyeshine at all, like they were eating the light from my flashlight. Then it was gone, vanishing into the dark beyond the fence with barely a sound. I went over to Moose, who was holding his front right paw off the ground, still whimpering. When I got to him, I could see blood matting the fur. It looked like he'd caught it on something, perhaps a nail or a piece of fence, but there was nothing sharp nearby that I could find. The wound, though, was deep. I carried all 70 pounds of him back inside, which was not easy. I got Sadie in too and locked the door. I was a panicked mess as I cleaned Moose's paw as best I could, wrapping it in gauze from the first aid kit. He'd stopped whimpering but kept licking at the bandage, his eyes darting toward the back door every few moments. When the Morgans came home at midnight, I had to tell them everything. I told them about Moose's injury, about the buck jumping the fence. I hadn't yet mentioned the howling, though, or the eyes, or the way every instinct I had was telling me that something was very off about this situation. Mrs. Morgan was apologetic and concerned. She knelt right down to check Moose's paw herself. "Oh, you poor baby. Sarah, I'm so sorry this happened. We've never had issues with deer getting aggressive before. Well, that buck cleared an 8-foot fence like it was nothing. I didn't even know they could do that," I explained to them. I could hear how shaky my voice was. Mr. Morgan frowned. "They usually can't do that. Must have been spooked by something. We'll call the vet first thing in the morning." He paused and looked at me. "Are you sure you're okay? You seem pretty shaken up." "I'm fine," I lied. "Just wasn't expecting to see that." They paid me extra that night. I wasn't really expecting that after what happened. Hazard pay, Mrs. Morgan called it with a nervous laugh. As I drove home, I kept checking my mirrors. I was on edge, very creeped out. I thought I would see something following me home, but I didn't. I should have told them that I couldn't babysit anymore. Made up an excuse of some kind. But the Morgans were good family friends, and besides, I didn't really have a good excuse yet. Beyond, a deer scared me so bad I don't want to be here. Sounds goofy, doesn't it? 2 weeks after that, when Mrs. Morgan called asking if I could watch Ellie on Saturday night, I said yes. I thought I'd be more careful. I would keep the dogs on leashes in the backyard instead. I'd stay highly alert. I wouldn't let what happened with Moose happen again. His paw, thankfully, had healed up quite nicely, though he still seemed nervous around the back door. That Saturday, I arrived at about 6. Ellie greeted me with her usual quiet smile, holding up her favorite stuffed rabbit. The Morgans went over the same routine again. Ellie's bedtime at 7:30, dogs out every 2 hours. Help yourself to anything in the kitchen. The safe, normal routine. Except it didn't feel normal anymore. Ellie went down without a fuss, and at 8 p.m. I steeled myself to take the dogs out. I kept them both on short leashes, staying close to the porch. The sun had just set, and the sky was all purple and blue. The woods were very dark. We'd been outside for maybe 3 minutes, only 3 minutes, when I heard it again. The howl. And once more it was closer, maybe only 30 yards from the trees. It was answered by another howl, this time from a different direction. This one was to the left, near the corner of the fence. Moose started whining, pulling hard toward the house. Sadie's body tensed up, and she was ready to run. But she wasn't looking at the woods. She was staring at something in the yard itself. I looked to where she was looking, and I felt my stomach sink. There at the far end of the lawn near the fence stood a deer. Even in the faint light from the porch, I could tell it was the same buck from before. It was huge, with a rack that had to be at least 12 points. It was standing still, watching us. Deer freeze up when they're startled. They run when they're scared. They don't stand there and size you up as if you are the prey. "Let's go inside," I whispered, backing towards the door. "Come on." But as I watched the buck, it began to open its mouth. I might have been suburban raised, but I knew what sounds deer make. Grunts, bleats, that snort-wheeze sound during rut. But what came out of this deer's mouth was none of those things. It was that exact same howl that I'd been hearing, rising from deep within its chest, impossibly loud, like the sound a wolf might make. A wolf possessed by some sort of demon, that is. As it howled, 2 more deer seemed to emerge from the dark on either side of it. Had they been there the whole time? If they had, I had not seen them until that point. And the way they moved was not like deer. They sort of prowled like big cats, and when they opened their mouths, they howled too. I didn't remember opening the door or getting the dogs inside. One moment we were on the porch, frozen in terror, and the next we were in the house, panting, the door locked behind us and my heart going crazy. The howling went on for another 5 minutes. I sat with my back against the door, both dogs pressed against me, and all of us were shaking like leaves. When the howling finally stopped, even the silence wasn't a relief. At 10 p.m., the dogs had to go out again. I stood by the back door for a full 10 minutes trying to work up the courage before going out. Finally, I did something I'd never done before. I opened up the door just wide enough for them to squeeze out, then immediately closed and locked it behind them. I watched through the window, my phone ready to call 911 if needed. But for what? A deer attack? The dogs did their business in record time, both of them staying within 5 feet of the door. When I let them back in, they practically bowled me over in their rush to get back inside. When the Morgans came home at 11:30, I was sitting on the couch, wide awake. Every light in the house was on except for Ellie's. "Sarah, is everything okay?" Mrs. Morgan asked. I'd had an hour and a half to think about what I would say. I started with, "Do you guys ever hear anything weird from those woods at night? Like howls?" Mr. Morgan shook his head. "No, nothing like that. Why?" I came clean. "I keep hearing them out here. It started a few weeks back, and it's been getting closer, I swear." Mrs. Morgan sat down next to me. "Sarah, are you sure? We're here most nights, and we've never heard anything unusual. Could it be coyotes?" "I know what coyotes sound like," I said. "Probably a bit more sharp than I should have. This sounds different. Tonight I saw 3 deer in your backyard, and they were making those sounds." They looked at each other. I could tell they thought I was losing it. To their credit, I probably was. "Deer can't howl like that, sweetheart," Mr. Morgan said. "They're physically not capable of doing it." I wanted to say something and insist on what I'd seen and heard, but what was even the point? They weren't here when it happened. They didn't hear it. And trying to convince someone that their backyard was being stalked by predatory deer would only make me sound psychotic. "I guess I'm just tired," I said finally. "It's been a long week." It was a lie. I knew what I saw, and I knew I would probably have to come back at some point. Because that's the thing about the Morgans. They're family. And you don't abandon family even when every cell in your body is screaming at you to run. The next time Mrs. Morgan called, 3 days later, I almost didn't pick up. But I told myself I had to. So I did. And I said yes. This time I came prepared. I downloaded every article I could find about deer behavior, aggressive wildlife, anything that could explain what I'd been seeing and hearing. The scientific part of my brain insisted there had to be a rational explanation. Rabies, maybe, wasting disease, some sickness that made them act this way. But diseases don't make animals coordinate, don't make them hunt in packs. Ellie, this time, was already in bed when I arrived. She'd been very tired, Mrs. Morgan explained, and they'd put her down early. The dogs greeted me with their usual enthusiasm, though I noticed both of them seemed reluctant to go near the back door. The Morgans left at 7, and I was alone in the house with 2 sleeping creatures and whatever was waiting in the woods. I made it until 9:30, before the dogs had to go out. I'd been putting it off, checking the backyard obsessively through the windows, seeing nothing but shadows and trees. Finally, Moose started to whine and paw at the door. I knew even he could not wait any longer. This time I went out with them. That time I'd let them out alone, I'd felt guilty about. I didn't want them to get hurt or not see it coming. Again, I kept them both on short leashes, staying under the porch light, and I had my phone in my pocket, with 911 already dialed. For a few minutes, everything was quiet. The dogs did their business and the woods stayed dark and relievingly still. I started to relax, feeling foolish for being so paranoid. Then Sadie's ears pricked up. She began to stare at the back fence, and her body went stiff. Like before, I followed where she was looking, and I found a shape darker than the surrounding shadows. But this was on the other side of the fence, the 8-foot-tall fence. Something that tall, that large, could not be a dog or coyote or even a deer. The howl started low, almost subsonic. I swear I felt it in my chest before I heard it in my ears. It rose and rose until it seemed to fill the entire world, bouncing off the house and the trees and the fence, coming from everywhere at once. And then the call was answered. Not from the woods or inside the fence. I spun around, and there it was. The massive buck was standing between us and the house. That was impossible. How could something that big have slipped past us? Dogs have extraordinary noses and ears, and even both of them had been taken off guard. I never heard it jump the fence, never heard it walk or breathe. In the porch light, I could see it so clearly for the first time. That fur around its mouth stained dark with something that likely wasn't dirt or mud. The way its jaw hung slightly open, revealing teeth that were sharp. The eyes that caught the light wrong, turning it dead and flat. It then took a step forward, then another. Moose was barking frantically. Sadie had gone completely silent, frozen in place. My hand moved without conscious thought, hurling my phone at the creature, the only thing I had to defend myself. It bounced off its shoulder, but the thing didn't even flinch. "Get back!" I screamed, grabbing a lawn chair and holding it in front of me like a lion tamer. "Get back!" For a minute, we stood there in a horrible staring contest. Me, the dogs, and that thing that could not be a deer. Then, slowly, it began to back away toward the fence. But it didn't turn around, and it didn't break eye contact. It just backed up until it reached the fence, turned a tad sideways, and jumped over. 8 feet straight up, smooth as water, barely even trying. Once it was gone, I grabbed both dogs and ran for the house. In seconds, we were all piled on the kitchen floor, happy to be alive. I rose up and stared at the back door, hoping that something wasn't about to try to break through. And luckily, nothing did. When the Morgans came home at 11, they found every door and window in the house locked, every curtain drawn, and once again, every light except Ellie's on. I told them straight out I could not babysit for them anymore. I didn't explain a reason, I just said I couldn't come back after this. Mrs. Morgan tried to press me. She wanted to know if something had happened, but I shook my head, thanked them, and left. There was no use explaining anything to them. Obviously, they weren't seeing or hearing any of this. It was just me. Why me? They did call me twice after that, asking if I'd reconsider. I told them no. I couldn't go back there, not to that house. To this day, I wonder what in the world was up with those deer. Was it all in my head? Were these aggressive, territorial deer? Or were they hunting me and the dogs? The Fridge, from Snippet. At one time, my husband was a maintenance worker for the city we live in. He would work in the streets cleaning up after homeless camps and clearing branches and debris when the weather got crazy. Usually it wasn't dangerous, and he liked that he wasn't stuck in an office all day. From his 3 years working there, he says the majority of injuries were from throwing out your back from improper lifting. You would have to occasionally keep an eye out for uncapped needles and bed bugs, maybe a rat or roach. Usually the homeless would just move along, leaving them to clean in peace. But he also has some pretty crazy stories, and he has allowed me to share this one. Thankfully, no one was injured in this story, but I have to imagine that, in the moment, this was quite terrifying. Seeing a lot of people lose their livelihoods due to addiction or economic pressures only makes you feel so bad until you see how feral a human can turn when left out in the wild. Some people might leave needles everywhere, their excrement and trash smeared everywhere. The maintenance crew even had a saying for when a trash bag broke on you and dripped onto your clothes: getting juiced. One hot summer day, they had reached a popular alley where homeless people liked to camp out. When they cleaned this alley, they usually had a marshal as backup down the alley to make sure there were no issues with the cleanup. Many people recognized the city trucks and started to clear away as the crew set up for the day. My husband said it was really sad that every week or so they cleaned the alley, and it only took a day for the people from these camps to come back and revert it back to an absolute dump. This was a continuous process that only put a band-aid on a bigger issue. This week, by some miracle, some guy had managed to travel with a full-size fridge, containing what everyone suspected was his clothes and some other items. My husband's crew supervisor explained to the man that either he moved the fridge, or they would have to toss it away. The supervisor was not getting anywhere with the man about this fridge. The crew decided to take a lunch break and give the man some time to figure out what he wanted to do. The man paced back and forth, probably on something that made him move erratically. A while later, the crew's supervisor tried again to let the man know they were going to have to take the fridge to the dump, since he could not move it. My husband watched from the cleaning truck as the man became belligerent, shouting and cursing and stomping about, saying that they were not allowed to touch his personal items. The supervisor tried to explain that if he could move it, there would be no issue, but this alley was city property, and he could not technically store his belongings here. As the man started getting more aggressive, the supervisor backed off and called the local marshals for backup. At this point, no one thought it was anything more than a crazy man trying to hang on to the last of what he could. My husband said it was a mixture of sadness and frustration as they waited in the truck for backup to arrive, while the man began throwing trash and yelling obscenities. Now they couldn't continue their work at all for fear of the man launching mystery bags at them. When the marshals arrived, one got down to speak to the man, and the other one in the car got down to inspect the inside of the fridge. As soon as the man saw this, he bolted away. The marshal called for backup to catch him further down the alley, and joined his partner to investigate this fridge. This is when my husband says the marshal at the fridge yelled at his partner to stand back, and said something that he couldn't quite understand. But he says you could see the panic on both their faces. The marshal who had opened the fridge stood there holding the door, looking petrified. The supervisor tried walking over to see what was going on, and the marshal calling in backup yelled at him to stay put. As the marshal came over to speak with him, the maintenance workers heard his radio crackle to confirm that the bomb squad had been called in and were on their way. Chaos among the maintenance workers ensued. Most of them, still hanging outside the trucks, started piling into them. The supervisor was told that they could move their vehicles to a safer distance, but the whole area had to be contained. Panic set in as the maintenance vehicles sat idly by, waiting to see if this bomb would go off. Many coworkers started calling their families to speak to them one last time, in case the bomb squad couldn't get there in time. This alley was no more than 2 cars wide and stretched for about a mile. There was no easy way in or out. The bomb squad arrived a couple of moments later. My husband said he felt every second move slower than the last as he watched them hover over the fridge. Then he watched as they backed away about 10 feet from the ticking time bomb, and he heard a popping sound. The bomb squad then pulled out the contraption inside the fridge and finished dismantling it. They were given the all clear and had to return to cleaning the alley. Everyone was way more on edge, but relieved that they wouldn't be turned into more gunk on the sides of the alley. They did end up catching the man a street down and brought him in. A couple of weeks later, on another cleanup, my husband asked the marshal about him. The marshal said it was a homemade bomb, but it didn't seem like the man knew what he was doing, which made the device extremely unpredictable. The man was arrested and hasn't been seen around the cleanup since then. My husband didn't stay in that department much longer and has not encountered another bomb fridge since. Lunch Demon, from Everybody Grandma. My niece is getting married pretty soon, and she asked me to help with the catering. She's doing it at her fiancé's family's farm, with about 80 people total. I told her I'd handle the mashed potatoes and gravy because I can do that in my sleep at this point. And she laughed, saying, "Aunt Barb, you've been feeding kids slop for 20 years. I think you can handle real food." I didn't take offense. She's not wrong about the slop part, honestly. But here's the thing. When she asked me, my first thought wasn't about the food or the logistics or any of that. My first thought was, thank God it's not at the school. You see, I need to get this out somewhere. I almost told my sister about it last Christmas, after I'd had too much wine, but I chickened out. She would have thought I lost my mind. I think I've told my husband most of it over the years, but not all of it. And I'd like to keep it that way because he worries enough about me as it is. What with my blood pressure and my knees and everything else that starts falling apart once you've hit your mid-40s. I work in food service at an elementary school. The building is very old. Very, very old. As in, you can tell they've painted over the same walls about 15 times. And there's that specific smell that old schools have, like chalk dust and maybe floor wax. And another smell underneath that you can't quite name. The cafeteria is downstairs, partly underground with those sad little windows up by the ceiling that let in a bit of light, but not much. I remember my first day, walking down those stairs, thinking about how it feels like a basement that someone tried to dress up as a lunchroom, which is basically what it is. Now, I grew up Catholic. Not that I go to Mass every Sunday anymore, but it's still in there, you know? My mom had holy water in a little font by our front door, and we blessed ourselves going in and going out. I got confirmed, did the whole thing. I believe in God, and that means I believe in the other side too. The enemy, or whatever you want to call it. I just never thought I'd have any personal experiences with that side. That was for movies and stories and those people on TV who are probably making half of it up anyway. But I don't think I'm making this up, even though I really wish I was. The school kitchen is attached to the cafeteria, obviously. Behind the kitchen, there's storage access and a walk-in cooler. And then there's this big supply closet. When I say big, I mean real big, like at least 30 feet deep. Shelves going way back into the dark because there's only one light. This single bulb on a pull chain right when you walk in. So the front part is lit okay, but the further back you go, the darker it gets. We keep stuff we don't use much back there. Big institutional cans of things, extra trays, holiday decorations for the kids. For years, I never thought twice about going back there. You just grab what you need, you get out, and you're done. The woman who trained me when I first started was named Dolores. She's retired now, moved to Florida to be near her grandkids. But I remember one thing she told me that I didn't quite understand at the time. She said, "Barb, if you ever feel like something's not right back there, just leave. You can get what you need later, or send someone else." I tried to ask more about it, but she kind of waved her hand and said, "You'll know if it happens." I thought she was being dramatic. After all, Dolores could be dramatic. Okay, so the first thing I need to tell you about is Lupe. Guadalupe. But everyone calls her Lupe. She's been working there longer than me. She's maybe 60 now. A little Mexican lady who barely comes up to my shoulder. But she works harder than anyone I've ever met. She never complains even when her feet are killing her. She does a lot of the soup and stock work because she's really good at it. And she seems to enjoy it, which is more than I can say for the rest of us when it comes to stirring giant pots for hours. We've got these tilting kettles for making stock and soup in big batches. The big ones that hold about 40 gallons, if I recall. There's a wheel on the side you crank to tilt it for pouring. You have to be careful with them because 40 gallons of boiling liquid can do a lot of damage if something goes wrong. Last March, Lupe was working one of the kettles. Chicken stock. I remember because the smell was really nice that day. She always made it better than the recipe called for. I was at the prep station cutting carrots or celery or something. I don't remember that part, but I do know that I was about 15 feet away from her. She had just stepped back from the kettle to grab a towel off the counter. Just a few steps back. And that's when the wheel started turning by itself. I saw it. I was looking right at it. Nobody was touching that thing. And it started to turn, and the kettle started tipping, and all that boiling stock began to pour out onto the floor right where Lupe had been standing only seconds ago. She screamed, I screamed, the stock went everywhere, splashing, steam coming up off the floor, and Lupe slipped, trying to get away from it. She went down hard, and some of it got on her leg. She was out for almost a month with those burns. But here's the thing. If she hadn't stepped back right when she did, if she'd been standing where she was, that stock would have poured directly onto her whole body. And people can die from burns like that. I looked it up later. The maintenance guy said the locking mechanism probably failed. Said the vibration from the walk-in cooler might have caused the wheel to turn. I just nodded and said, yeah, that must have been it. Not sure what else I was supposed to say. Lupe came back to work eventually, but she wouldn't go near those kettles anymore. Someone else took over the stock duty, and nobody really talked about what happened. But I saw her face when she came back that first day. She looked at that kettle like it was a person who had tried to harm her. Now on to the second thing. We have 6 big commercial ovens along the back wall of the kitchen. Old, but they work fine. We get them serviced regularly. I'm always the one who checks the knobs after lunch service, and I check every single one. Make sure they're all off. It's just something I do, probably borderline OCD about it, honestly. So we're cleaning up after lunch, and I start to smell smoke. Not like the typical burnt cheese or whatever, but actual smoke. I look over, and there's gray smoke coming out of oven number 3. I'd checked that knob maybe 20 minutes earlier. It was off, and I know it was off. I yelled for everyone to get back, and I grabbed the fire extinguisher. When I opened the oven door, smoke poured out, and inside there were actual flames. Something was burning in there. When everything cooled down and we looked inside, there was a kitchen towel. Almost completely burned up, but you could tell what it was. Nobody had put a towel in that oven. I asked everyone. And why would they even do that? Even if somehow a towel got in there by accident, the oven was off. Again, I checked it. The knob was in the off position when I opened that door. Towels don't walk into ovens and catch fire by themselves when the oven isn't even on. One of the other women, her name's Patrice, has worked there as long as me. After everyone else went home that day, I asked her straight up. I said, "Patrice, what do you think is going on in this kitchen?" She said that her grandmother down in Louisiana used to talk about bad spirits. She said that some places just end up with them, and you can't always make them leave. You just have to live with them and hope they don't decide to get serious. I then asked if that's what she thought we had here. She said she didn't know what else to call it. Okay, now on to the supply closet. Remember I said there's only one light and the back part is dark? I'd been feeling weird about going back there for a while. That feeling like someone's watching you. I'd tell myself I was being stupid and go anyway, because I needed kidney beans or whatever, and I wasn't going to let my imagination run my life. One morning I went back for something. I was maybe halfway to the back shelves, and I looked up into the dark part, and I saw these two little points of light. My brain said it's just something reflective. Probably metal on a can or something catching the light from the bulb. That made sense to me. I kept walking toward it because I'd already explained it away. What's so scary about some reflection? I got maybe another 5 feet, and those two little lights blinked. Blinked like eyes, closing and opening. Oh, I left in a hurry. I didn't get whatever I went back there for. I made myself go back later with Patrice, and there was nothing there. Just shelves and cans and boxes. I've seen those eyes 2 more times since then. Once when I was putting away Christmas decorations after winter break. I looked up at a high shelf, and there they were, looking down at me. I knocked over a whole rack of trays getting out of there. The other time I was leaving for the day, and I turned off the light, and right before everything went dark, I saw them way in the back, just for a second, watching me. I don't know what it is. I'd rather not know. But just in case, I brought in a little bottle of holy water from church, and I keep it in my locker even now. But I have no idea if that does anything at all. But I do try not to be alone down there anymore. I make sure someone else is always around. The other women, we don't really talk about it directly, but there's sort of an understanding that it's best not to go to the storage closet alone. My niece's wedding is in April, and I'm actually looking forward to making those mashed potatoes. Real kitchen, real food, daylight. No walk-in cooler humming in the background and no storage closet with 1 light bulb and 30 feet of darkness behind it. I've got maybe 6 years until I can retire with full benefits. That's what keeps me going. 6 more years of early mornings in that basement kitchen, of checking oven knobs 3 times and staying out of the back of the supply closet, pretending I don't feel and sometimes see something watching me. Don't you worry about me. I'm gonna make it just fine. But whatever's down there knows I know. And I think it's fine with that for now. There is a serial killer on the loose. From Anonymous. I cannot tell you where I work or give real names. I know how that looks, like I'm making it up or covering my tracks. But if I'm right about what I think I saw, then the guy I'm about to describe is still out there, still working in that same office, and I'm still the guy who cleans that office 3 nights a week, alone, between midnight and sunrise. So no, I'm not going to put my name on this. So I do 3rd shift custodial work, ranging from commercial buildings to office parks. This was actually my backup job. I used to work at a plant my whole adult life, but it got shut down and everything moved to Mexico. I was 47 when that happened. You know how many people want to hire a 47-year-old man with a bad back and no college? Cleaning toilets at 3 a.m. was the best I could do. It's fine, I don't mind working alone. After 20-something years of factory noise and people everywhere. You know, the quiet is actually nice. The business park where this happened has maybe 6 buildings. Small ones, 2 floors each. They have insurance offices and accountants and chiropractors. Real boring stuff. I've had that contract for a few years now. You get to know the patterns. Who leaves their desk a mess, who works late, who leaves passive-aggressive notes about the bathroom soap. There's this one guy. I'll call him the consultant, because that's basically what his door says. Some vague business consulting thing. I've never understood what he actually does for a living. His office is always clean, it barely looks used. Just a desk and some chairs and those fake motivational posters that every office has. He works late a lot. Maybe 2-3 nights a week he'll still be there when I come through. Most people who are staying late and working still, they tend to ignore you. You're part of the building to them, same as the furniture. But this guy, the consultant, he's different. Every time he hears me in the hallway, he comes out and wants to chat. He asks about my night and my wife and my life, and he remembers details that I told him weeks back. I've been doing this work long enough to know that's not usual. The ones who go out of their way to buddy up to you, the guys who make sure you see them being friendly and normal, there's usually a reason they're doing that. 8 months ago, I found out what his reason might be. It was winter, stupid cold, around 2 a.m. I was working my way down the hall on the 2nd floor, and his light was still on. The door opened just a crack. I could hear him talking, but the voice sounded off, muffled. I figured he was on a phone call, so I stopped outside with my cart, waiting to see if I could skip his office and come back later. But then I heard something that wasn't talking. I'm not sure how to describe it just right. It was a wet sound. A gasp that got cut off and turned into something else, then nothing. Then him moving around in there, footsteps, something heavy being shifted across the floor. The door swung open and he was right there. He looked at me. I looked at him. He had his sleeves pushed up, and there was something dark on his forearms. Could have been anything in that light. Could have been coffee or maybe nothing. His face was the same as always, calm and friendly. He said something like, "Working late, you know how it is." He told me to give him 20 minutes and the office was mine. He closed the door then. I finished my round and I came back when he was gone. I let myself in with my key. The office looked the same as always, except it smelled like cleaning products. Strongly, like a whole bottle of something had just been dumped out. The carpet behind his desk was wet. I stood there looking at it for a moment. Then I left, and I finished my shift and drove home, still kind of thinking about what that interaction even was. Now, about a week later, there was a missing persons case on the local news. A woman in her early 30s. She had brown hair and she was last seen leaving a bar. I recognized her face, but I couldn't figure out from where. A month or so later, I saw him leaving late with a duffel bag, a big one. He was carrying it real careful, with one hand underneath, like whatever was in there was heavy. He saw me watching from down the hall. He smiled and said something about donating old clothes. That night I called in, an anonymous tip, told them something was wrong with this guy, gave them the address, described what I'd heard and seen. The person on the phone sounded like she was filling out a form and waiting for me to stop talking. Nothing came of it. Another woman went missing a few weeks later. A different part of town, but same general type. 30s, lived alone, went out at night and never came back. I called again and got the same result. I actually went to the station eventually. I talked to someone who said they'd looked into it after my first call, and that there was nothing there. The guy had no record and ran a normal business with no complaints. The detective told me sometimes people hear things late at night and their minds fill in details that aren't there. I went back to work. Not too long ago, they found a body in a pond not far from the business park. Woman, mid-30s, strangled. It was on the news for about 2 days. I don't know if she was one of the missing women from before or someone new. The police haven't released much information just yet. This man, he still works late. He still comes out to talk to me when he hears my cart in the hallway. He still smiles and asks how I'm doing. I keep thinking about how easy it would be.
Hello,
The
my name
building
is
is
Vid,
empty
and
at that
today...
hour. Nobody around, just me and him and whatever's behind that door. I can't quit. I'm 54 with a bad back and a wife whose medication costs more than our mortgage payment, and it's getting more expensive every year. This job has insurance. I can't just walk away from that. So I show up and I empty his trash and I vacuum his carpet. I smile right back at him when he smiles at me. And I guess all I can do is wait for the next body to turn up. Maybe when they find enough of them, someone will finally listen. Or maybe they won't. Maybe I'll keep cleaning his office until I retire or die, whichever comes first. And he'll keep doing whatever he does, and nobody will ever connect the dots. I don't even know why I'm writing this. Maybe because if something happens to me, or if they finally catch him, someone will know that the janitor tried. That I saw something and I said something and nobody cared. The Stranger. From Panama Guy 776. My brother-in-law keeps asking me why I won't take solo calls anymore. He thinks I'm being lazy or trying to stick him with the overnight and weekend stuff, now that he's bought into the business. I told him it's an insurance liability thing, which isn't totally a lie, but it's not the real answer. Now, I've been doing this plumbing work, going on 15 years. I started as an apprentice right out of high school, because college wasn't for me, and my dad knew a guy. I worked my way up, got my license. Eventually, I went in on a small operation with my brother-in-law about 5 years back. We do okay. Residential mostly. Some light commercial. The territory covers a pretty wide stretch of rural Illinois, which means a lot of windshield time between jobs. And that means a lot of podcasts, hint hint, audiobooks, whatever. Good thinking time. This particular call came in on a Thursday afternoon from a realtor, a woman named Pam or Patty. Can't remember exactly, but I'd have to check the invoice. She had a vacant property about 40 minutes outside of town. It was listed for sale, and apparently every single person who came to look at it complained about a leak in the main bathroom. A shower head dripping, she said. Not a big deal usually, but enough that buyers kept mentioning it, and she wanted it handled before the next showing that weekend. A vacant house, a simple fix, should take maybe an hour tops. She let me know that the garage door would be open, and I could let myself in through there. Just close everything up when I'm done, using the panel on the outside of the garage. She'd leave a check on the kitchen counter for me. I told her I could get out there Friday evening after my last scheduled job, and she said that was fine. The house was way out there, I mean way out. Some of you might know how rural Illinois gets once you're off the main roads. Corn and soybeans and occasional clusters of trees breaking up the horizon. This place was down a gravel road, about 2 miles from the nearest paved surface. It was 6:30 p.m. when I pulled up. Looks like they had neighbors about a half-mile away at the closest, but too many tree lines to see them. The sun was getting low, but there was still plenty of light. The house was actually nice. 2 stories, probably built in the 90s, vinyl siding, decent-sized lot. A little overgrown, but not bad for a vacant property. And the garage door was open just like she said. I grabbed my bag and walked in through the garage. That's when I noticed the entry door, the one that goes from the garage into the house, was also open already. Not just unlocked, but standing wide open. That gave me a little pause. Could have been the realtor forgot to close it all the way. Could have been wind pushed it open if the latch didn't catch. Old houses can do weird things, so I pushed it open the rest of the way and called out. "Hello? Anyone in here? It's the plumber. No response. I walked through a little mudroom into the kitchen. The check was on the counter like she said. Dated, signed, the amount was right. Everything looked normal. The cabinets were empty and the counters were clean. It had the echoiness of an empty house.
Are as simple as a locked hopper. This torch is powering this block, which locks the hopper so it can't pull anything out of the top one here. It's important that the top one's pointed away, because it's unlocked, it could send items down. And it stays unlocked so that, as items flow over top, it only grabs what it needs to. That's why we have the filter in here. The item you want, and 4 others that aren't in the system. So, even when this is totally full, it only has a stack and 4 items in it, which is just under the signal strength for 4. So, we get a signal strength of 3 instead. And that will power this repeater down here. Item filters are as simple as a locked hopper. This torch is powering this block, which locks the hopper so it can't pull anything out of the top one here. It's important that the top one's pointed away, because it's unlocked, it could send items down. And it stays unlocked so that, as items flow over top, it only grabs what it needs to. That's why we have the filter in here. The item you want, and 4 others that aren't in the system. So, even when this is totally full, it only has a stack and 4 items in it, which is just under the signal strength for 4. So, we get a signal strength of 3 instead. And that will power this repeater down here, turning off the torch, and letting items flow through. It'll grab emeralds, and only the first thing in the slot here. And when it gets down below signal strength 3, back down to 45 items total, it goes down to 2, and everything's locked again. So, it only filters out the items you want. And the design's tileable. Item filters are a simple
I called out again. Hello? Still no response. I shrugged and went to find the bathroom. The main floor bathroom was off a hallway past the living room. Decently sized, needed updating, but not terrible. I could see the issue right away. The shower head was dripping steady. and it was not just an occasional drop, but a thin stream. It probably needed a new washer or maybe a cartridge replacement. An easy fix. I set my bag down and I got to work. Now here's the thing about empty houses. They can make noise. You'll often hear settling pipes and wind outside, animals in the walls or attics sometimes. I know this. I've worked in hundreds of empty houses, and I don't get jumpy about normal sounds. The sounds I started to hear were not normal sounds. About 10 minutes into the job, I heard something from upstairs. A creak, then another, like footsteps, but not all the way. So it made me think the house was settling. Sure, that sounded right. I stopped what I was doing and just listened. There was nothing else, so I went back to work. A few minutes later, there was movement in my peripheral vision. Out in the hallway, just past the bathroom door, I turned my head and there was nothing there. Just the empty hallway and the living room beyond it. I'm not a nervous person. You can ask anybody who knows me. But something about that movement bothered me a bit. It didn't feel like a shadow shifting or light changing. It felt like something pulling back. Like something had been there and moved away right as I turned to look. I put down my wrench and walked out into the hallway. I looked both directions. Then I went to the living room, checked the kitchen, even opened a couple closet doors. Empty. Nobody there. I stood in the living room for another 30 seconds, just listening. The house was quiet except for that dripping, which I could still hear from the bathroom. Get it together, I thought. Then I went back to work. I was almost done. I had the shower head off and was replacing the cartridge when I saw it again. Movement past the doorway. But this time I didn't just catch it in my peripheral vision. This time I saw it directly. A shape, a person, moving from the hallway toward the stairs. I dropped what I was holding and called out, "Hey!" I didn't get a response, but I did hear footsteps, definitely footsteps, going up the stairs. Not fast, not running, but walking, like whoever it was did not care that I'd seen them. I should have left right then, grabbed my crap and left out the door, calling the cops from my truck. That's what a smart person would have done. But instead, I followed. Honestly, I don't know why. At the time, I was thinking this was some squatter who didn't know anyone was coming. Someone I could just tell to clear out while I was there. Maybe I thought it was a teenager messing around in some empty house. My mind was trying to make sense of it. The stairs went up to a landing and then turned. I went up slow, one hand on the railing. The light was different up there, much dimmer. The sun had gone down more than I realized while I was working, and the upstairs hallway was full of shadows. Hello? Someone up here? Nothing. There were maybe 4 doors off the hallway, all of them open. Bedrooms, a bathroom, what looked to be an old home office. At the end of the hall was a larger room with a big window. One of those bay window setups with a bench seat built in. The window faced east, and the moon was up, nearly full, casting light into the room. I walked toward it. I'm not sure what I was expecting to find. Maybe to look out the window and see someone running across the yard. Maybe to find an open window where somebody had climbed out. But I was not expecting what I actually found. The room was empty except for the built-in bench and some curtains that had been left behind. The moonlight came through the window bright enough that I could see pretty clearly. And there, against the wall to my left, maybe 6 feet away from me, someone was standing. They were pressed flat against the wall, arms down to their sides, completely still. They were in the shadow just outside where the moonlight hit directly. I think they thought they were hidden from view. That's what gets me the most. They were standing there like a kid playing hide and seek, like if they just stayed still enough, I wouldn't see them. But the moon was bright, and my eyes had adjusted, and I could see them just fine. The outline of a person, Head, shoulders, arms, legs, just standing there against the wall, not moving, not breathing as far as I could tell. I couldn't see their face. I couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman. I couldn't tell anything about them except that they were there and that they'd been watching me. They'd been in this house with me the whole time I'd been working downstairs. My whole body wanted to run. My muscles were screaming at me to start running. But something else kicked in. Some instinct I didn't know I had. And whatever it was, it told me that if I ran right now, they would know that I'd seen them. And I did not want to know what they'd do in response to that. Would they chase me? Were there more of them somewhere in the house? I didn't know anything, except that I needed to not be there anymore. So I pretended. I made myself look toward the window like I was checking if it was locked. I walked over to it, casual as I could manage, and I looked out at the yard for a second. Then I turned and walked back toward the hallway. I did not look directly at the wall. I didn't look in their direction at all. I walked down the stairs at a normal pace, but my hands were trembling. I got to the bottom of the stairs and turned toward the bathroom. Then I ran, grabbing my bag, not bothering to zip it. Pretty sure I dropped some stuff as I went through the kitchen and into the garage. I hit the button on the outside panel, and the garage door started coming down, but I didn't wait to make sure it went all the way. I was in my truck with the engine running before it was halfway closed. I drove about a mile down that gravel road before I pulled over because I had to catch my breath. I sat there for maybe 5 minutes just breathing. Then I called the realtor. She didn't answer though, so I left a voicemail along the lines of, "There's someone in the house. You need to call the police. There was someone hiding upstairs. I saw them." I was still pretty shook, so I'm not sure exactly what I said. She called me back about an hour later. She said the police had gone out and checked the property, but found nobody. All the doors and windows seemed to be secure. No signs of forced entry or anyone being there. She asked if maybe I'd seen a shadow or a coat hanging somewhere that looked like a person in the dark. I said, yeah, maybe. That was probably it, but it wasn't. I know what I saw. There was someone in that house, someone watching me work, and would run upstairs to hide again if I looked. A person, a stranger, who stood 6 feet away in the dark, hoping that I didn't see them. But when the cops came, they were gone. I still think about what would have happened if I'd reacted differently. What if I'd yelled or confronted them, or tried to run right away? Think about the type of individuals who might hide in empty houses in the middle of nowhere and watch strangers work. What kind of person would that be? And would it be the kind of person you really want to confront? So, moral of the story is my brother-in-law can think whatever he wants.
At Walden University, I can get the W. With multiple ways of learning, Walden gets and respects my reality.
My class schedules work for me and my grind.
Get the W.
Can you tell me what this was? From Peter. My English is not perfect, so excuse me if some of this reads strangely. I had a friend check the grammar, but some things I could not translate exactly how I wanted to say them. I work for a company that maintains electrical infrastructure in rural areas. I won't say which country because I don't want problems with my employer, just in case. Somewhere in Central Europe is enough for you to know. The area where this happened is mostly forest and farmland, with small villages spread far apart. Some of these villages have maybe 200 people, some even less. In winter you can drive for an hour and see nobody else on the roads. This was last November. We had storms that knocked down trees and damaged lines in several places. I was sent alone to check a section of line that runs through forest about 40 kilometers from the nearest town of any real size. The job was just to drive the access road along the line, checking for damage, and to mark anything that needed repair crews. The road, however, was not paved. It was just gravel and dirt, wide enough for just one vehicle. The power company maintains it, but only just. In autumn, with the rain, it becomes mud in places. You need the right vehicle or you'll get stuck. I'd started early in the morning and worked my way along the line for several hours. By afternoon, I was deep into the forest, maybe 15 kilometers from the nearest village. The sky was heavy with clouds, and it was getting dark earlier than usual. I decided to check one more section, then I would head back. I stopped the truck near pole number 247, because I could see from the road that something had struck it. Not fallen completely, but it was leaning now. I got out to take photographs and notes for the repair crew. Around then, I heard something moving in the trees. I guessed it was deer. We have tons of deer in these forests, and they move through the underbrush constantly. But this sounded a bit different, a lot heavier than what I was used to hearing with deer. And it was coming toward me, not running away like deer do when they hear a vehicle. I stopped, and I listened. The sound kept coming. Slow steps breaking sticks on the ground. Something large was pushing through. I could not see anything yet, because the forest was thick in that area, and the light was already dim. To be truthful, I'm not someone who frightens easily. I've worked in these forests for 11 years. I've encountered things like wild hogs, wolves, even a bear once about 6 years back. You learn to be calm and to assess the situation, to know where the real danger is, and when there is no danger. But this felt like danger. So I moved back toward my truck. I thought I would get inside and wait for whatever animal this was to pass, but the sound then changed direction. It was moving to cut me off from the truck. So that's when I decided to hide instead of run. There's this maintenance shed about 20 meters from where I was standing. A small metal structure, about 3 meters by 3 meters. It was where we keep some equipment and supplies. The door had a padlock, but luckily, I had a key. I went to it as quickly and quietly as I could, unlocked it, went inside, and pulled the door closed behind me. This shed had no windows, just metal walls and a metal door with gaps at the bottom and around the frame where light comes through. I stood in the dark in that little building, and I listened closely. For maybe 2 or 3 minutes, it was silent. I was hoping then I'd overreacted. It was just a boar or a deer, and my mind had made it into something worse. But then the footsteps came. They came right up to the shed. These did not sound like animal footsteps. It wasn't 4 legs, but 2 that I heard. Heavy legs that circled the shed very slowly. Was this a person? I thought. Why were they here? Why were they doing this to me? I wondered. I held my breath. Through the gap at the bottom of the door, I could see the thing's shadow moving. Something was definitely walking around the shed. It would pause on occasion, then start walking again. I pressed myself against the back wall and waited. I watched as the shadows of the footsteps stopped at the door. I could hear it breathing then, right on the other side, deep and slow. Something was standing right there, only centimeters from where I was hiding, separated by only a thin metal door. I looked through the gap carefully. I saw 2 legs, but they were not human. They were covered in dark fur or hair. I couldn't tell which, but that was no person. They were so long and thin, and there was something wrong with the knees, like they were broken. The feet were large and ended in claws, not toes. I didn't move, and I tried not to breathe. I stood there watching those legs through the gap at the bottom of the door, and I prayed to God that the lock would hold if it tried to get in. It stayed at the door for a very long time, Really, it might have been just a couple minutes, but time does weird things in such moments. I could hear it sniffing out there. Reminded me of a dog, like when a dog tracks something. It knew I was in there, it had to. The shed smelled like me, like my cigarettes, like the coffee I'd spilled on my jacket that morning. But the door didn't open. The thing outside made a sound low and guttural, like nothing I'd ever heard an animal make. But then the legs moved away from the gap. I heard footsteps again, circling one more time, then moving off into the forest. But you know what's funny? I didn't leave that shed. Not yet. In fact, I stayed in that shed for over an hour. I stayed motionless, listening for any sound that might tell me it had come back, or that it was merely hiding a few meters away. But there was nothing. I could hear the wind in the trees and the distant sound of crows, but that was it. When I finally opened the door, the forest was almost completely dark. I walked to my truck with my keys already in hand. I didn't look around. I didn't stop. I was too scared to do that. I got in, started the engine, and drove. The access road connects to a larger rural road that eventually reaches the main highway. I drove faster than I probably should have on that gravel, not caring if I damaged the truck. I just wanted to reach the paved road where there would be other vehicles, other people, lights. I was about 5 kilometers from the junction when I saw it again. It was standing at the edge of the road, just where the trees meet the gravel. In my headlights, I could see it clearly for the first time. Bear with me now, even if it sounds crazy. It stood on 2 legs like a man, very tall, maybe 2 meters or more. The limbs were long and thin, like I said before about the legs. The body was lean, though, almost starved looking. Have you ever seen how a bear looks when it has not eaten for a long time, and the bones show through the fur? It was like that. A scrawny frame with visible ribs and spine, even through the fur that covered it. But that head did not look like a bear's. The face was narrow and long, with a snout like a wolf's. The ears were pointed and stood up from the top of the skull. The eyes caught my headlights and reflected back yellow. It was crouched over something on the ground. A deer, I believe, a young one. And it was eating. When my headlights hit it, the thing shot its head up to look at me. Its face was dark and wet with blood. The fur around its mouth and down its chest was matted with fresh blood from the deer it had just killed. It didn't run. It didn't seem bothered with me. It just looked at me as I drove past, continuing to chew. God, I could see pieces of meat hanging from its jaws. Its eyes followed my truck until I was past it, and then I saw it in my mirror, crouching there watching me go. I drove and drove and drove until I made it to a petrol station, one with bright lights and other cars in the lot. I went inside, got coffee and a snack. It helped calm me down, but this wasn't something I'd soon forget. That deer is what I kept seeing in my mind. The poor creature it had just killed and was eating when I drove past. A fresh kill still bleeding. That meant when it was circling the shed with me in it, sniffing at the door, trying to find a way in to where I was hiding, it had not yet eaten. It was hungry. I know what people will say. A bear, some sick one that had just lost its fur in patches, even a wolf that somehow looked larger in the dark. They would tell me my imagination filled in details that were not there. By now, I've heard all these explanations, even in my own head. But I know what I saw. It was no wolf and no bear. It was no animal that should exist in these forests or anywhere else. I've seen pictures and drawings of what people call werewolves. In movies, in old books, in artwork. I'm not saying I believe in such things. I'm not a superstitious person. I go to church at Easter and Christmas, like most people here, and that's the extent of my religious thinking. I don't believe in monsters or legends or fairy tales. But if someone asked me to describe what I saw that night, the only word that fits is werewolf. But I need you to know before I end this story, I don't call it a werewolf because I think it's a man who transforms under the full moon. No, it's because that's what it looked like. A thing that was somehow both wolf and not wolf. Animal and not animal. It walked on two legs, hunted in the forest, and knew enough to circle a shed, looking for a way inside. Warning. The following story contains depictions of violence against pets. My experiences as a groundskeeper. From Not Your Willie. You ever wonder who works at graveyards? Well, that would be me. Last month, they hired a new kid to help me with the summer maintenance. He's a college boy, maybe 19 or 20, and he needed some work between semesters. On his third day, I found him eating his lunch in the northeast corner, sitting on one of the old limestone markers, like it was a bench at a park. No, I didn't yell at him because it wasn't his fault. Nobody had explained anything to him yet. I just walked over and told him he should come eat by the shack instead. He asked why, of course, and I told him it was just better that way. He looked at me like I was a superstitious old man. He's not really wrong there. But he packed up his sandwich and came with me. He didn't ask any more questions after that, which I thought showed some intelligence on his behalf. I think he'd already noticed by then that none of the other workers spent any time back in that corner, if they could help it. He'd probably noticed that we mow that section as fast as we can, then we leave. He might have even noticed that we don't schedule burials in the plots along the back fences, even though there's still space available, and families sometimes request them. You learn things when you work at a place like this for a long time. It doesn't happen all at once. It builds up real slow over the years. A little piece here, another piece there, and eventually you realize that there's this whole collection of knowledge that nobody ever discusses out loud, but everyone seems to note. I've been the head groundskeeper at this cemetery since 1987. Before that, I worked under a man named Harold Fitch for about 5 years, while he trained me to take over when he retired. Harold had worked here since the early 60s, and the man before him went back to just after the Second World War. There's a continuity to a job like this that you don't get in most places. Things get passed down. The northeast section is the oldest part of the grounds. The stones back there date to the 1840s, when this area was mostly just farms and a small church with a burial ground beside it. Most of those old markers are rough-cut limestone from local quarries, and they've weathered so badly over the years that you can't read most of the names anymore. Some of the plots don't even have visible markers now. You can only tell where they are by the shallow depressions in the ground where the earth settled after the wooden coffins rotted and collapsed underneath. I don't know exactly what's wrong with that section. I've never seen anything I could point to and say, there, that's what it is. But something is off about that ground. I've known it since my first year here, and nothing in the decades since has changed my mind. Harold was the one who first made me aware of it, though he never explained it directly. It was fall of my first year, and we were working late because an afternoon burial had taken longer than expected. The sun was getting low, and Harold told me to take the shovels back to the shack while he finished tamping down the new grave. The shed sits at the edge of the property, right up against the tree line that separates the northeast section from the woods beyond. I walked over there without thinking anything of it. I'd grown up in this town, and I'd been in the cemetery plenty of times as a kid. It was just a place to me back then. I was almost to the shack door when I heard footsteps somewhere behind me, back among the old stones. It was the sound of someone walking through dry leaves, I thought. So I stopped and turned to look. But the light was fading, and the oak trees back there were thick and old. Some of them have been growing since before the Civil War. and they cast heavy shadows, even in the middle of the day. I called out a hello, because I figured it was probably teenagers. We got kids in there sometimes looking for a place to drink and to try to scare each other. The footsteps, though, stopped as soon as I spoke. I waited for whoever it was to answer me, or to come out where I could see them. But instead of a voice, I heard something else. It was like someone trying to speak, but muffled, like someone trying to talk through a thick blanket. I then heard Harold's voice behind me, much closer than I expected. He'd walked over from the gravesite without me hearing him approach. He simply said to me, "Come on, let's go," in this flat tone, and he took the shovels out of my hands. He put them inside the shack himself. He closed the door, and we walked back toward the front gate together. He didn't say a thing about it, and I was too afraid to ask. But after that, I did pay attention. I noticed how Harold never sent me to work in that corner alone. I noticed how when we did have to mow or trim back there, he always came with me, and we worked as fast as we could, not talking much, until we were finally finished. I also noticed the way he would sometimes stop what he was doing, and he would look toward those old stones, like he was listening for something. About 6 months before Harold retired, we were doing an early spring cleanup after the snow melted. I was raking leaves near the back fence, and I found a dead cat. Now, that's not unusual in a cemetery, because strays do wander in sometimes. They do get old, like all of us do, and they die, like anyone else does. But this cat had not been killed of old age. Something had torn it apart. The pieces were scattered over a wide area, much wider than you'd expect from a dog or a coyote or anything else that might attack a cat. I went and got Harold to show him. We went to the site, and he just looked at it for a long stretch of time, and he didn't say a word during that stretch. Eventually, he told me to bury the pieces and never mention it again. I was so confused and scared. I asked what he thought had done it, and he said he had no idea. But the way he said that made me think he had some idea, and he just didn't want to share it. There have been other dead animals over the years. Not many, maybe a dozen that I've found in all my time here. They're always in that northeast corner or close to it. They're always torn up the same way. But I just bury them, don't tell a soul, following exactly what Harold had told me. I've never seen what does it. I've heard things a few times late in the day when I'm working alone. These strange sounds in the trees, movement in my peripheral vision that's gone when I turn to look. One time I found these footprints in the mud along the back fence after a heavy rainfall. But they didn't look like any animal I could identify, and I didn't want to look at them for very long. The families who have plots back in that section sometimes complain that the graves look disturbed. They'll say the grass is torn up, or that the soil looks like it's been dug at. I tell them the same thing. Probably animals, raccoons, or groundhogs, and I go on ahead to fix whatever needs fixing. And that usually satisfies them. But what I don't do is tell them that I've seen those same disturbances myself, and that they're always worse on the older graves, those ones from the 1840s and 1850s, where the wooden coffins have long since rotted away, and there's nothing between whatever's in that ground and the surface, except a few feet of dirt. Well, I'm in my 60s now. I've been thinking about retirement for a while. The new kid, the college boy, he's not going to stay. He'll finish out the summer, then he'll go back to school, and he'll get a degree in something and have a career that doesn't involve digging holes. But eventually, someone will take over this job from me, just like I took it from Harold, and how he took it from the man before him. When that happens, I'll have to decide how much to tell them. Again, Harold didn't tell me much directly. He showed me by example. Stay away from the northeast corner when you can. Do not work there alone. Don't stay past sundown. If you hear something, do not go looking for it. I've followed those rules for over 40 years, and I'm still here. Whatever's in that ground, I've learned to live alongside it. No pun intended. We have an understanding, I think. I take care of the cemetery, and I don't bother it. And it mostly leaves me alone. You know, for a time, my own mom was a lunch lady. Literally right up until I graduated into the school she worked at. Then she said, "So long, sucker, no freebies for you." It was sad, because my older brother got all the freebies while he was there. Now, was I jealous? Yeah. So maybe I'll go find that lunch demon and ask it to go stick its nasty little toes in my brother's mashed potatoes sometime. Good night. Thank you all so much for tuning in to this episode of Tales from the Break Room. I've been your host, Darkness Prevails, and you can find me on X at Dark Prevails. Help this show grow by leaving a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, or just follow and listen there. Simply search for Tales from the Break Room. You can also send me your scary work stories at eeriecast.com/submit. Here's to a big new year for all of us. I'll be clocking out till next time, but stay tuned, because I always come back.
The $5 Big Breakfast Deal is back at Wawa. Get any Sizzly, any...
In this episode, I'll be sharing some true scary camping stories that make you rethink how fun it is to sleep in a thin fabric bag in the middle of nowhere. But before we start, please consider giving this video a like. And if you've ever had something weird happen while camping, feel free to contact us and share your story. I'd love to feature it in a future video. So I grew up as a military brat, as my dad was stationed at Hill Air Force Base in Utah, and honestly, we made the most of everything the outdoors had to offer. Looking back, I feel pretty lucky we were surrounded by so much natural beauty. We went to Farmington Canyon all the time. It was absolutely gorgeous up there, especially during the fall when the leaves changed colors. The aspens would turn this brilliant gold, and the scrub oak would go deep red. The drive took about an hour from base, maybe a little more depending on traffic, and how many times we had to stop because my little brother needed a bathroom break. I still remember that dirt road we had to take to get up there. It was pretty nerve-wracking at times, especially when I got old enough to really understand what could go wrong. On one side, you had these massive rock walls towering over you, and on the other side was just this steep drop-off. I mean, really steep. No guardrails or anything like that to stop you if something went wrong. Just open air and a long way down. The road was so narrow that when another car came from the opposite direction, both vehicles had to slow way down and inch past each other carefully. Sometimes one driver would have to back up to find a wider spot. My mom would always hold her breath during those moments and grip the door handle. My dad would just stay calm and wave at the other driver. but once we got up there and found a good spot to hike or have a picnic, it was totally worth it. The views were incredible, and the air smelled like pine and earth. And there were moments where I could peer out my window and see nothing but tiny, colorful trees way, way down below. It made my stomach flip a little, but I couldn't stop looking. I remember this particular trip really well because it was such a rare treat. We were actually going camping in a tent with my family and our 2 dogs. This was the 1990s, but we were using this old 1970s style metal frame tent that we'd picked up at a garage sale for practically nothing. It was heavy and kind of a pain to set up, but my dad said it was sturdy, and that's what mattered. My father had really bad back issues, so most of the time we were stuck doing day trips or staying in cabins and hotels where he could sleep in an actual bed. Sleeping on the ground wasn't really an option for him usually, so the fact that we were going tent camping this time was a huge deal to me. I was beyond excited, and I must have packed and repacked my stuff 3 times before we even left. Then we finally arrived at the campsite in the late afternoon, and after driving around for a bit, we chose a spot right next to a creek. You could hear the water rushing over the rocks, and it was really peaceful. Then we cooked hot dogs over the fire, and my brother burned his as usual. The dogs were running around sniffing everything, completely in their element. By the time we were ready for bed, the fire we'd built had died down to just simmering ashes glowing in the dark. We made sure to douse it completely with water. My dad was really careful about that, and then we all crawled into our sleeping bags. It was colder than I expected, even inside the tent. Later that night, I woke up to one of our dogs growling low in his throat. It was that kind of growl that made the hair on the back of your neck stand up. Earlier in the day, we'd seen rabbits hopping around the campsite, so I figured that's what had him all worked up. Probably just some small critter moving around outside sniffing for food scraps. But then I realized he wasn't growling at some rabbit. He was growling at the sound of footsteps crunching footsteps on gravel. Someone was out there. I didn't know what I should do. Should I wake up my parents, or should I say something? I was too scared to even move, so I just laid there in my sleeping bag, absolutely terrified. Whoever it was seemed to be moving around slowly, inspecting different areas of our camp. I could hear him getting closer to our tent, then moving away, then coming back. At one point, I heard him trying the door handle on our vehicle. That metal clicking sound when someone pulls on a locked car door. My dog's growling kept getting louder and more aggressive. He was really worked up now, and I could feel him trembling next to me. That must have been what finally scared the person off, because after what felt like forever, but was probably only a few minutes, the footsteps moved away from our campsite and faded into the distance. Soon after the footsteps disappeared, my father, who I realized had been awake the entire time as well, probably lying there just as frozen as me, decided that now that the moment of potential danger had passed, it was time to get the hell out of there. He quietly unzipped his sleeping bag and started waking up my mom and siblings, who had somehow, incredibly, slept through all of it. I don't know how they managed that with the dog growling and those footsteps crunching around, but they were completely out. Then, we all moved quickly but quietly, stuffing our sleeping bags and gear into bags as fast as we could. Nobody wanted to be out there any longer than necessary. The old metal tent came down in record time. We talked about what happened the entire trip back down that narrow, winding dirt road. It was around 1 a.m. I still remember looking at the dashboard clock and seeing those green numbers. I don't think any of us slept much at all the rest of that night, even after we got safely back to our own beds at home. I know it's not much of a climax to the story. Nothing dramatic actually happened, but it scared me to death at the time. And that feeling is just burned into my memory forever. Even now, decades later, I can still hear those footsteps crunching on the gravel and feel that paralyzing fear in my chest. The weird thing is, I remember seeing multiple cars full of what looked like college students. At least that's what my dad said they were based on how they were acting and how loud they were being, though I could be totally wrong about that. Hauling up that dangerous canyon road in the middle of the night. Like who drives up a narrow dirt road with steep drop-offs at 1 a.m.? It seemed really strange to us at the time. But I still have no idea who that person prowling around our campsite actually was. Were they lost and wandering from one of the other campsites trying to find their way back? Were they just some opportunistic passerby who saw our camp and thought they'd see what they could steal? Or, and this is the thought that really bothered me, was it someone who actually lived out there in those woods, deliberately preying on campers? I'll never know the answer, and honestly, I'm not sure I want to. It was early spring 2016, right after I turned 24. My friend and I had just pulled into Black Canyon Rim Campgrounds, just outside Payson, Arizona. We'd been coming out here 2 or 3 times a year for a while now. There's something about this place that keeps pulling us back. The views are absolutely incredible, especially at sunset when the whole canyon lights up in orange and red. And the best part was, it's only about 2 hours from the city, so it's perfect for a quick weekend getaway. The area was pretty quiet and secluded, which was exactly what we wanted. There was a little privately owned convenience store a few miles down the road where you could grab basics if you forgot something. Before that, there was a small town about 20 miles back where we'd usually stop for gas and any last-minute supplies. Now, the entrance to the campground was right off the highway, just a dirt road that branched off to the side. You couldn't miss it because there was this big wooden campground sign posted at the beginning. It had all the usual information and whatever general news campers needed to know. Sometimes they'd post warnings about mountain lion sightings or remind people about the fire ban. The dirt road itself was pretty straightforward, mostly just one long stretch with maybe one fork in it. The whole thing stretched out for several miles into the wilderness. We got curious one time and decided to drive the entire length just to see where both paths would take us. The first path eventually led you to another highway entrance on the other side. About halfway down that route, there was an old ranger tower standing by itself. We always wondered if anyone actually used it anymore.
Which locks the hopper so it can't pull anything out of the top one here. It's important that the top one's pointed away because it's unlocked, it could send items down. And it stays unlocked so that, as items flow over top, it only grabs what it needs to. That's why we have the filter in here. The item you want, and 4 others that aren't in the system. So, even when this is totally full, it only has a stack and 4 items in it, which is just under the signal strength for 4. So, we get a signal strength of 3 instead. And that will power this repeater down here, turning off the torch, and letting items flow through. It'll grab emeralds, and only the first thing in the slot here. And when it gets down below signal strength 3, back down to 45 items total, it goes down to 2, and everything's locked again. So, it only filters out the items you want. And the design's tileable. Item
other path was less interesting as we followed it all the way to the end, but it just stopped. There was this old abandoned cabin on that dead-end path, maybe a few miles in. You wouldn't notice it unless you were really looking for it. It was set back pretty far from the road, mostly hidden behind some thick bushes and larger trees. We'd spotted it by accident one trip, and always made a point to look for it after that. Something about abandoned places out in the middle of nowhere always felt a bit creepy but fascinating at the same time. Most of the snow had finally melted away, and all the animals were starting to wake up and move around again after the cold months. We'd almost always spot wild horses roaming around, usually in small groups. Deer were everywhere if you kept your eyes open, and there were tons of little critters darting across the road. So it really was the perfect time of year for this kind of trip. We rolled in around 4 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon, which meant we'd have the place pretty much to ourselves for at least a day or two before the weekend campers showed up. Normally, we tried to arrive by noon at the latest, so we'd have plenty of daylight to set up camp and settle in, but this whole trip was kind of spontaneous. We'd been talking about needing a break from everything, and then we realized we both had to work that coming weekend. So we just said screw it, and decided to head out on a Tuesday instead. Sometimes the best trips are the ones you don't overthink. The problem was, the sun was already starting to dip below the ridgeline, and we still hadn't picked our camping spot. We were losing daylight fast, maybe an hour left at most. There weren't many people out there, which was nice. Just 2 other groups that we could see. Both looked like families with kids. They'd set up camp fairly close to the entrance, only a few hundred yards or so from where the dirt road met the highway. Probably wanted to stay close in case they needed to make a quick run to that convenience store, or just felt safer being near the main road. We preferred to go deeper in, find something more secluded, where you couldn't hear any traffic noise at all. Working customer service jobs will do that to you. After dealing with demanding customers all day, every day, you start craving silence and solitude. We drove down the dirt road, passed right by our usual camping spot, and kept going deeper into the campground. We wanted to be as far from everyone else as possible. Then finally we found it, the perfect spot. It was this small clearing that sat right on the edge of a hill, almost like a natural lookout point. From there, you could see the entire valley spread out below us. The view was absolutely stunning, especially with the sunset painting, everything in shades of pink and orange. I remember thinking this was it. This was going to be our new favorite spot from now on. We were already talking about coming back here next time. If only we'd known what was going to happen the next night. That one incident changed everything, and we never camped there again after that. We decided to get a campfire started right away and agreed we'd just skip setting up a tent this trip. Honestly, we didn't have enough daylight left to bother with it anyway, and her car was comfortable enough for sleeping. We'd done it before plenty of times. The plan was simple. I'd crash in the back seat. She'd take the passenger seat up front. We'd crack the windows just a little bit for fresh air, grab a few blankets each, and that would be that. There's something about sleeping in your car out in the wilderness that just hits different. The next day was pretty uneventful, which was exactly what we needed. We didn't do anything special or go on any big hikes. We just existed. That's what these trips were really about, decompressing. Letting all the stress and frustration from our jobs and regular life just melt away. But all throughout the day, I had this weird feeling that wouldn't go away. It felt like someone or something was watching us. Every few hours, I'd hear the crunch of leaves, or a branch snapping just beyond where I could see. I kept telling myself it was probably just deer, or maybe one of those wild horses wandering around. My friend didn't seem to notice anything strange, or at least she didn't say anything about it. So I tried not to make a big deal out of it. No point in freaking her out over what was probably nothing. I pushed the feeling to the back of my mind and tried to enjoy the day. But when night fell, that uneasy feeling was still there, maybe even stronger. I wasn't the only one feeling off either, I think, as my friend pulled out her bottle of sleeping pills before bed, which caught me by surprise. She almost never needed those on our camping trips. That was kind of the whole point of coming out here. The fresh air, the sounds of nature, the crackling fire. All of it usually knocked us out cold without any help. It was getting close to 1 a.m. by the time we finally settled into the car to sleep. I figured it must have been some small animal, maybe a raccoon or a fox, just curious about our campsite. I went back to scrolling through my phone, looking at social media to pass the time until I got tired enough to sleep. My friend was already out cold in the front seat. About 10 minutes went by, maybe less. Then I heard it again. But this time it was right outside my door. I immediately lowered my phone and froze. As I turned my phone away from my face, the backlight from the screen lit up the window above my feet for just a second. That's when I saw it. I swear to God, I can still see it perfectly in my mind. 2 hands were pressed against the window, and they were covered in scabs and scratches. The fingers were curled over the edge of the window, gripping it from the outside. The fingernails were long, way too long, and they looked like they hadn't been cut in months. Behind the glass, I could see the outline of a face pressed right up against the window. In those brief moments when the glass cleared, all I could make out were the eyes. I wanted to scream, to yell for my friend to do something. Anything, but nothing came out. We just stared at each other. It felt like hours, even though it was probably only seconds. After what felt like forever, probably only about 10 seconds in reality, the hands slowly started to release their grip on the window. And I just sat there. What the hell just happened? Why didn't I do anything? Why didn't I wake up my friend? And why am I still just sitting here doing nothing? That last thought snapped something in my brain. I started pounding on the back of my friend's seat with my fist, hitting it hard enough to jolt her awake. She came to in a confused, groggy daze, and she was mumbling something, asking what was wrong, but I didn't have time to explain yet. I unlatched the back door and kicked it open, practically throwing myself out of the car. The campfire that had burned down to just glowing embers. Whoever or whatever that thing was, it was gone. At least I couldn't see it anymore. But that didn't mean it wasn't still out there, watching from somewhere in the darkness. But I didn't want to stick around to find out. I started scrambling around our campsite, grabbing anything we'd left outside. The whole time I was doing this, I kept looking over my shoulder, spinning around at every little sound. My ears were straining to hear those footsteps again. That slow, deliberate crunching through the leaves. I slammed the back door and noticed 2 handprints on the window. Without really thinking about it, I wiped them off with my sleeve. Not sure why I did that. I got in the driver's seat, started the car, and took off pretty quick. My friend woke up looking confused. "What's going on?" "Someone was outside the car," I said. "What? Who?" "I don't know. But we should go." She told me to slow down because I was going way too fast on the dirt road. She had a point. I was probably going to mess up her car if I kept driving like that. I slowed down a bit once we got closer to the highway, but I definitely wasn't taking my time, just wanted to get out of there and back to civilization. We got to the highway, and I kept driving for about 20 miles before my friend made me pull over at a Denny's. She wanted to eat and hear what the hell actually happened back there. I told her everything while she worked through her pancakes. She believed me, which was good because I'm pretty sure I looked half crazy at that point. Everyone always talks about fight or flight, right? Well, I'm starting to think I've got neither. Apparently, my survival instinct is freeze and hope it goes away. I mean, I literally just sat there and did nothing. That's what gets me. Was it just another camper screwing with us? Or maybe someone living in that abandoned cabin we saw down the road? Or was it something else entirely? Something that lives in those woods and watches campers when they're sleeping? I don't know, probably never will. We did go back to that area a few times over the next couple years. Couldn't completely give it up, I guess. But we never went deep into the campground again. Always stayed close to the highway where other people were around. Close enough that if something happened, we could get help fast, or at least make a quick exit. Whatever that thing was that night, I really hope it was the last time I ever see it. Though part of me wonders if it's still out there, doing the same thing to other campers, pressing its nasty hands against car windows just watching. Anyway, that's why I don't do isolated camping spots anymore.
Working across teams is tough, but Asana helps you handle it. That's because Asana is where humans and AI coordinate work together. AI can spot roadblocks and assign work in a snap.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you're doing well. In today's video, we're going to share a few true apartment horror stories. But before we get started, it would really help us if you could give this video a like. And if you have any creepy or unexplained experiences, feel free to contact us. We'd love to hear your story, and maybe even share it in a future video. I recently went on a trip to visit my sister who lives in another country. I stayed with her and her family in their new apartment for a few weeks. Their place was on the second floor, which was nice because we got good airflow. They had this small balcony that stuck out from the living room, and my sister always used it to hang up wet clothes after doing the laundry. It was actually pretty convenient. Now, right below the balcony, there was a driveway where they parked their car sometimes, and their garage was directly underneath the balcony on the ground floor. One day the weather was nice and breezy, so I thought it would be a good time to wash my clothes. I didn't want to be a burden and leave dirty laundry piling up. So I did a load of washing and brought everything out to the balcony to dry, just like I'd seen my sister do it. I made sure to use clips to attach all the hangers to the clothesline properly. I didn't want the wind to blow anything away, especially since it was getting a bit breezy. After that, my sister suggested we go out for lunch at this nice little restaurant she'd been wanting to show me. We spent a couple of hours out, just enjoying our time together and catching up. We didn't get back home until around 3 in the afternoon. As soon as we got back, I went straight to the balcony to collect my dry clothes. But when I looked at the clothesline, I noticed something weird. One of my favorite short pants was completely gone. What made it even stranger was that the hanger was still there, clipped to the line exactly where I'd left it. The clip hadn't moved at all. I started looking around, thinking maybe I was just confused. I checked the whole balcony floor, thinking perhaps it had somehow fallen and was lying in a corner somewhere. Then I leaned over the railing and looked down at the garden area below the balcony, hoping to spot my short pants down there in the grass or bushes. My niece, who's a sweet kid and always helpful, offered to go downstairs and search around for me. She said she'd check if the wind had maybe blown my short pants further away, possibly toward the neighboring apartment complex that was just a short distance from my sister's building. I stayed up on the balcony and watched her from above. Then I saw her stop and start chatting with an elderly man. He lived alone in one of the second-floor units in the building next to ours. From what I could see, he seemed like a friendly, harmless old guy. My sister told me later that he'd been living there for years and often said hello to them when they bumped into each other. Since he knew my sister's family and seemed nice, my niece didn't hesitate to approach him and ask if he'd seen anything. They talked for a few minutes, and I watched as he shook his head. At that point, I just figured the wind must have been stronger than I thought and carried it off somewhere far away, maybe into someone else's yard, or even out onto the street. I felt a bit disappointed since it was one of my favorite short pants, but I accepted it was lost, and there wasn't much I could do about it. That evening, after we all sat down and had a nice dinner together, my brother-in-law suggested we should go for a walk down by the pier. It was a beautiful evening, and he thought it would be nice to get some fresh air and show me around the area a bit. We were all getting ready to leave, putting on our shoes and grabbing our jackets, when suddenly we heard a knock on the door. My sister went to answer it, and to my complete surprise, it was the elderly neighbor from earlier, and he was standing there holding my missing pants in his hands. I just stood there staring at him, not quite believing what I was seeing. He had this casual, almost too relaxed expression on his face as he handed it over. He said something like, "I forgot I had picked this up earlier today. I just realized this must be the pants you were looking for." The way he said "forgot" just didn't sit right with me. It sounded strange. I thanked him and took the pant back, trying to be polite, but honestly, the whole situation made me feel really uneasy. Something about it just gave me the creeps. I kept thinking about how my niece had specifically asked him about the short pants that afternoon, and he'd told her he hadn't seen it. But apparently, he'd had it the whole time. That didn't make any sense to me. The more I thought about it, the more uncomfortable I felt. For the rest of my stay at my sister's apartment, which was still another week or so, I made a point to keep my distance from him. Whenever I saw him around the building or in the common areas, I would just nod politely and keep walking. I didn't want to have any more interactions with him if I could avoid it. I'm a 25-year-old female, and I've been living with my aunt and uncle for a while now. They have 2 kids, a 15-year-old daughter and a 3-year-old son. Anyway, so this happened just a few nights ago. It was around 8 or 9 p.m., and my aunt and I had gone to Target to pick up some stuff. The 3-year-old was with us, sitting in his car seat in the back. We were driving home and everything seemed normal. Then we stopped at this red light on the main road near our neighborhood. I don't know why, but both my aunt and I turned to look out my window at the exact same time. And I swear, for like a split second, we both saw what looked like a person. They were crossing the street, not at the crosswalk or anything, just walking right across the middle of the road. But here's the weird part. In that same instant, they just vanished, like they were never there. My aunt and I just looked at each other. We didn't even have to say anything. We both knew we'd seen the same thing. So my aunt and I talked about it for a minute in the car, and we both agreed that what we saw had to be something paranormal. I know that might sound crazy to some people, but the thing is, both of us have lived in haunted houses for most of our lives, like we've seen things before. We know what it feels like when something isn't right. So when we both saw that figure disappear like that, we just kind of knew. But honestly, after we talked about it, we sort of brushed it off, and the rest of the drive home was totally normal. We pulled into the driveway, grabbed all the Target bags from the trunk, and hauled everything inside. The little guy was excited because we'd gotten him this new Hot Wheels set he'd been begging for. So we let him sit on the living room floor and play with his new cars for a bit before bed. Eventually it got late, and we put him to bed. My aunt and I were both pretty tired from the day, so we headed to our rooms around 11:30, maybe closer to midnight. By that point, we honestly weren't even thinking about what happened at the red light anymore. And then around 2 in the morning, I feel someone shaking my shoulder. It's my aunt, and she's standing there in her pajamas looking confused. She asks me, "Did you call 911?" I'm still half asleep, and I'm like, "What? No, why?" She explains that there's a police car sitting outside our house right now. Apparently, the officers knocked on the door and woke up my uncle. They told him that someone from our address, or somewhere really close to our address, had called 911. But when the dispatcher tried to talk to whoever called, nobody answered. So they sent a patrol car to check it out and make sure everything was okay. Now, my aunt was wondering if maybe I had done it by accident, so she wanted to check with me first before they talked to the kids. I was pretty sure I hadn't, but I grabbed my phone off my nightstand anyway and pulled up my call history. Just to be certain, I scrolled through it, and the last 2 calls I'd made were from earlier that day. That was it. No 911 call anywhere. So the police talked to my aunt and uncle for a few more minutes, checked around the outside of the house with their flashlights, but they couldn't find anything suspicious. So eventually they just said to call them if anything else happens. Got back in their car and left. My aunt and I were both pretty weirded out, but we figured maybe it was just some kind of mistake with the phone lines or something. Then about an hour later, around 3 in the morning, the power suddenly went out. My aunt and I both got up because it woke us up when the AC shut off and it got quiet. We checked the breaker box, but everything looked fine on our end. We looked outside, and it seemed like it was just our house, or maybe our block. In the morning after we all got some actual sleep, my aunt and I sat down with our coffee and started talking about everything. The figure we saw disappearing in the road, the mystery 911 call that nobody made, and the power going out in the middle of the night for no reason. And all of it happened within the same few hours, on the same night. So we both felt like this couldn't just be random coincidences. My aunt and I have been thinking about it a lot, and we're pretty convinced that whatever we saw on that road might have followed us home. Like it saw us see it, and then decided to attach itself to us, or the car or something. I don't know how this stuff works exactly, but the timing is just too weird to ignore. So I'm seriously considering reaching out to my friend's fiancée. Her name is Sarah, and she's really knowledgeable about paranormal stuff. She's dealt with hauntings before, and she knows how to cleanse houses and get rid of negative energy. She's even helped people who thought they had hexes or curses on them. My friend has told me stories about some of the things Sarah's helped with, and honestly, she seems like exactly the kind of person we need right now. I haven't called her yet, because I wanted to talk to my aunt and uncle first, and make sure they're okay with bringing someone in. But I think I'm going to reach out to her this weekend. I just really want to handle this before it gets any worse. I'm 26, and I finally got my own place a few months ago. When I was apartment hunting, I made sure to pick something on a higher floor because I honestly get paranoid about people being able to peek in my windows or anything like that. Safety was a big thing for me. Anyway, now the layout of my building is kind of weird. To get to my apartment, you have to go up this staircase, and you literally walk right past my downstairs neighbor's door before you get to mine. I ran into him one time in the stairwell, maybe like a month after I moved in. He introduced himself, and we chatted for a minute. He seemed pretty normal, maybe in his 30s or so. He mentioned he was having some people over that weekend, and said I should stop by if I wanted to meet some folks in the building. I appreciated the invite, but I'm not really a party person, so I politely said no. We still say hi when we see each other, though, so things have been fine between us. One night I was out in the parking lot packing up my car. It was already dark outside, probably around 8 or 9 p.m. I was getting all my camping gear together because I was planning to leave early the next morning for a weekend trip, and he just kind of appeared out of nowhere and started talking to me. At first it seemed normal, but then he started asking these really specific questions that made me uneasy. Like, do you live alone? And how long are you going to be gone for? He kept pushing even after I gave vague answers. The thing is, this guy is like 30 years old. He's not some clueless teenager. He's old enough to know exactly how those questions sound when you're asking a young woman who lives by herself. After that night, he started knocking on my door. Always after dark, usually somewhere between 7 and 9 p.m. It's happened multiple times now. I honestly don't know which is the right thing to do at this point. And every time he knocks, it's for weird reasons. He asks if I want to hang out at his place, or if I want his leftover beer that he doesn't want. Just strange stuff. Then one day, he asked if he could put up a security camera. I said okay, because I thought it seemed normal enough. But then he put the camera pointing up towards the stairs, directly at my door. Now here's the thing, I'm the only person who lives upstairs, and there's nobody else up here. So his camera is literally just recording me every time I come and go. He hasn't done anything really crazy or threatening. It's more like all these little things that are creepy, but not quite bad enough to report. Like everything exists in this gray area, where I can't tell if I'm overreacting. Oh, and he's also made it pretty clear that he finds me attractive. He's said things that make that obvious. So now, I'm sitting here trying to figure out what I should even do about this situation. Part of me thinks I should contact the apartment management and let them know what's been going on. But another part of me is worried that I'm blowing things out of proportion, like he technically hasn't done anything illegal. I don't want to be that person who causes drama or gets someone in trouble when maybe he's just socially awkward or something. But here's the thing. He literally just knocked on my door like 20 minutes ago. I didn't answer. And now I'm sitting in my apartment feeling anxious about leaving. Like, what if I need to go get something from my car? What if he's still hanging around out there? I feel like I'm going to run into him, and it's going to be this awkward confrontation. Or worse, what if ignoring him is making him angry? I have no idea how he's going to react to being avoided. The layout of my apartment makes this even worse. My kitchen window looks directly out onto the area where my front door is. So when he comes up and knocks, if I'm in my kitchen or living room, he can literally see my shadow or see me moving around inside. There's been a couple times where I know he saw me before he knocked, so then I felt like I couldn't pretend I wasn't home. It's like I'm trapped into answering because he already knows I'm there. I really don't know if this is serious enough to actually report or if I'm just being paranoid. But something in my gut is telling me this isn't normal. I just wish I knew if I was overreacting, or if I should trust my instincts on this one. I got my puppy back in December when she was about 8 weeks old. She's a rescue from a local shelter here in the city. She's around 4 to 5 months now, and living with me in my third-floor walk-up, which has made potty training. She's been doing so much better the past week or two, and I'm really proud of her progress. The only issue is once the sun goes down, it's like a switch flips. Everything outside becomes a threat, and she's on high alert. I've been trying to work with her on building confidence during our evening walks, and it's going okay. We're getting there slowly. But there's this one thing she absolutely will not let go of. The standalone garage building behind our apartment. Day or night, rain or shine, she will lock onto it, point and start barking like it's her sworn enemy. I have no idea what her deal is with that garage, but she's convinced it's up to no good. We live in a really safe neighborhood, so I've always just assumed she was being a total scaredy cat and overreacting to nothing. Well, tonight I was really determined to make it through the entire day without a single potty accident in the apartment. I've been keeping track, and we were so close to a perfect day. There's this big open field right next to those garages, and it's actually pretty well lit back there, with a couple of streetlights. So I figured maybe if we went somewhere new and spacious, she'd feel more comfortable and actually go. Plus, the field usually doesn't have many people around at night. So instead of our normal route, I decided to walk her over to the field to try one more time before we called it a night and headed to bed. Right away, she started trying to warn me about something, and that's when I saw him. This guy with no shirt on, squatting down and unwrapping what looked like bandages or toilet paper or something. I'm 100% sure he was taking a dump back there in the field. Now I can't stop thinking about how long this has been going on. Is this guy actually living behind those garages? Or does he just hang out back there every night? Or does he seriously just come back there to use the bathroom outside like it's normal? No wonder my puppy has been so freaked out and refusing to go potty outside. She probably smells him or hears him back there and knows something's off. I'm so weirded out right now and creeped out, and also completely grossed out. I walk behind those garages literally every single day with my puppy. It's part of our normal route to get to the grass area where she usually goes, and there's poop scattered all over back there, like multiple piles in different spots. I've always just assumed it was from other people's dogs, because some dog owners are lazy and don't pick up after their pets. I've been annoyed about it for weeks, but never thought twice about it. But now, after seeing that guy tonight, I'm sitting here second-guessing everything. So I sent an email to my property manager as soon as I got back inside, like within 5 minutes of seeing this. But now I'm lying here thinking about it, and I don't even know what they can realistically do about this whole situation. They work normal business hours. They're not going to be out there at midnight trying to catch this guy, right? So what are my options here? Should I be asking them to install security cameras back there? call the cops and file some kind of report or add more lighting or maybe a fence to keep people out. I honestly have no clue what's reasonable to expect them to do, or how quickly they can even fix something like this.
Welcome to Big Savings This Week at Grocery Outlet, your extreme value headquarters. Right now, get 1 dozen grade A large eggs for only 99 cents. Stock up on this easy source of protein, perfect for breakfast, dinner, or meal prepping your favorite go-tos. Eat better for less with this extreme value deal on an everyday essential. This deal is only available until January 27th while supplies last. Limits apply, so hurry to your local grocery outlet today.
Grocery Outlet Bargain Market.
I was recently at a search and rescue training school with the Civil Air Patrol in the countryside of Pennsylvania. The weather was extremely cold, and we were up in the mountains along the Appalachian Range. My job that night was fire watch duty, which meant I had to stay awake and keep an eye on things. Our fire watch station was positioned a short distance outside the area where the rest of our squadron was sleeping in their tents or shelters. I don't recall the exact time, but I believe it was around 1 o'clock in the morning. At that hour, there was virtually no one else around me. The only other people nearby were members of another squadron, but they were already asleep down the trail from where I was stationed. And to reach them, I would have had to walk a fair distance through the dark woods. The main command center and other central areas of our camp were located not too far away from my position, but I was still surrounded by forest on all sides, keeping watch alone in the cold mountain night. It was completely quiet and peaceful around us, and we were just sitting by the fire, trying to stay warm and pass the time. The only sounds were the crackling of the flames and maybe some wind rustling through the trees. But then about 25 or 30 minutes after our shift started, we suddenly heard these absolutely terrifying screams that sent chills down our spines. These weren't normal animal sounds or anything we'd heard before. The screams were coming from somewhere far off in the distance, echoing through the dark forest. What made it even creepier was that the sounds seemed to be moving, like whatever was making them was traveling up and down the mountain. We could hear them getting louder, then softer, then louder again as they moved around. My fire watch partners and I just froze and looked at each other with wide eyes. We were all extremely scared and completely confused about what we were hearing. Our minds were racing, trying to figure out what could possibly make sounds like that in the middle of the night. After a few moments of nervous silence between us, one of my partners spoke up and suggested that maybe it was coyotes screaming. But honestly, none of us were really convinced by that explanation. It just didn't sound quite right. But we couldn't actually see anything out there because it was pitch black dark. Our campfire was literally the only source of light in the entire area. And beyond that small circle of firelight, everything was just complete darkness. One of the guys with me claimed he saw something moving out there in the shadows. But honestly, I think he might have been imagining things because he was so scared. It's easy for your mind to play tricks on you in situations like that. It felt like something or someone was out there in the darkness, watching us the entire time. That feeling of being watched was almost worse than the screams themselves. We were all pretty shaken up and on edge for the rest of the field training exercise. Even after the screams stopped, none of us could really relax or feel comfortable again. I'm still trying to make sense of what happened that night. Does anyone have any explanations for what those screams could have been? And has anyone else experienced something similar during night watch in the mountains? I'd really appreciate hearing your thoughts. Or if you know what kind of animal or thing could make sounds like that.
Okay, Richardson, the holidays are done.
We thought so too, but then Verizon just gave us their best deal.
today's episode, we're going to tell you some really scary stories that will give you chills. But before starting the video, please consider giving us a like. And also, if you have any scary stories that happen to you, we would love to hear them. You can send your stories to us, and we might share them in our next video. Now let's begin with today's scary stories. I'm 21 years old, and I've spent my whole life in Maine. Growing up, I lived in different places, sometimes near the beach, sometimes in the city. But for the past 2 years, I've been staying with my grandparents at their house, way out in the woods. It's right in the middle of central Maine, kind of stuck between two small towns. Out here, you don't really see many people, and our closest neighbors are pretty far away. The thing is, it's actually a gorgeous place, and I've been coming to this exact house since I was a baby. And honestly, even when I was little, I always felt like something was a bit off about these woods. I can't really explain it, but there's just something about them that's never felt quite right to me. Over the years, I just got used to that feeling. It became normal, I guess. Then when I moved away during the pandemic, I kind of forgot all about it. But now that I'm back living here, that feeling has come back too. I noticed it again on my very first night in this room. I hadn't even finished unpacking yet. There were still boxes stacked up everywhere, full of my stuff. I had thrown up these crappy curtains on the windows, in a hurry, not even hung them properly, just trying to make the room feel a little more private and safe. Then, at exactly 4:32 in the morning, I woke up suddenly. At first, I thought someone had left a radio on or something. It sounded like it was coming from right outside my bedroom door. Now, this house has this really old speaker system that's built right into the walls. My grandparents had it installed way back in the day. There's a speaker in basically every room that was supposed to connect to a central radio. But the thing is, nobody has hooked that system up in like 20 years. As I lay there thinking about those old speakers, I kept listening to whatever was playing outside my door. It was this really strange music, like nothing I'd ever heard before. The singing was in some language I couldn't recognize at all. It didn't sound like Spanish or French or anything familiar. Growing up in Maine, I'd always heard these creepy stories about wendigos and skinwalkers in the woods. And to make things worse, I had just binge-watched this horror series on YouTube right before moving here. So yeah, my mind was already in a pretty paranoid place. I just stayed frozen in my bed. Then at 5:30 a.m., the sounds just stopped, and a few minutes later, I could see the first light of sunrise starting to come through those shitty curtains I'd hung up. I had never been that scared in this house before that night. It shook me up pretty bad. A few months went by after that, and things with my grandfather got worse. His condition kept declining, and eventually, it got to the point where my grandmother couldn't take care of him at home anymore. So we had to move him to a veterans home where he could get proper care. It was tough, but it was the right thing to do. Now it was just me and my grandmother living in this big old house in the woods. Looking back on it now, I remember my grandfather used to mention hearing music sometimes. He'd say he could hear singing in some language he didn't recognize. But honestly, I just wrote it off as his dementia. I figured his mind was playing tricks on him. My grandmother told me she heard it too once or twice, but I didn't really take her seriously either. I guess I just didn't want to believe it was real, so I convinced myself it was nothing. Time kept passing, and life went on. Before I knew it, October 2024 had rolled around. The leaves were changing colors and falling off the trees. and the woods around the house were getting that creepy feel they always have in autumn. For a while after that, nothing too crazy happened. There weren't any major incidents that really disturbed me or my grandmother. Things were actually going pretty well, all things considered. I had gotten comfortable enough with the area that I'd go on walks down the main road pretty much whenever I felt like it. Didn't matter if it was morning, afternoon, or even evening. I was starting to feel genuinely safe in my environment again. Then one evening, when I was coming back from a walk, I noticed what I thought were deer standing in my front yard. They were just standing there, completely still, staring right at me. At the time, I didn't think much of it. We see deer around here all the time. But the more I think back on that moment, the more unsure I am about what I actually saw. There were 6 pairs of glowing white dots out there in the darkness, just watching me. I told myself they were deer eyes reflecting light, but something about it didn't feel right. The next morning, I went outside to take a closer look. I wanted to see if those deer had left any tracks behind, and they did. The tracks looked like they were made by something walking on 2 legs, not 4, and the spacing between them was really wide, like whatever made them had a long stride. I've spent enough time in these woods to know what I'm looking at. I know bear tracks, moose tracks, deer tracks. I've seen them all plenty of times. These tracks didn't match any of those. They were just different. I tried bringing it up to a few of our neighbors when I saw them in town. I thought maybe they'd seen something similar or could explain it. But every single one of them got this uncomfortable look on their face and basically told me to drop it. They didn't want to talk about it at all. The only advice any of them gave me was be careful, and that's it. And these aren't new people. These folks have been living out here for decades. Some of them longer than I've even been alive. If anyone would know what's in these woods, it's them. So the fact that they refused to talk about it made me even more uneasy. That's when I started doing my own research online. I was digging through local history, trying to find anything that might explain what I was experiencing. That's when I discovered that this whole town, our house, the roads, everything, it's all built on old Penobscot tribal land. Land that belonged to the Penobscot people long before any of us were here. Then I found out it was a place where they used to do ceremonies and bury their dead. After I learned that, the sounds got louder and harder to ignore. The scratching sounds changed. Now it sounded more like something was carving into the wood, and the slow footsteps I used to hear turned into heavy, fast running. Whatever this thing was, it was angry. I could feel it. Whatever was out there didn't like me, or maybe it didn't like what I was, a person living on this land. It would run across the roof of the house and bang on the doors. The sounds were getting worse every night. Then one day, my grandmother came to me looking really shaken up. She told me she finally saw it. She said there were 2 white glowing eyes right outside her bedroom window, staring in at her. She said it felt like those eyes were looking straight into her soul from the dark forest. When she told me that, I knew I had to do something. I couldn't just keep ignoring this anymore, especially now that it was affecting my grandmother too. So I did some research on what the Penobscot people traditionally did to respect the spirits. Then I went out and bought some sage. I burned it all around the outside of the property first, walking the whole perimeter, and then I went through every room inside the house. After that, I made an offering chicken bones, which is what I read was traditional in the local tribal spirituality. I left it out in the woods near the house as a sign of respect. I know how all of this sounds. It sounds like something out of a horror novel or some crappy Netflix show that tries too hard to be scary. If someone had told me this story a few years ago, I probably would have laughed it off. But I'm telling you what actually happened. And here's the weird part. Since that day I made the offering, everything has changed. The weather warmed up, even though it's still fall, and it should be getting colder. The noises completely stopped, and honestly, I've been feeling better too. I'm sleeping at normal hours instead of staying up until 4 or 5 a.m. It's like whatever weight was pressing down on this place just lifted. Whatever this thing is, I don't think it hates me anymore. At least not like it did before. It's more like it tolerates me being here. Like we've reached some kind of understanding, but it's not happy about it. It's just accepting that I exist on this land. But there's one thing I know for sure now, and it scares the hell out of me. Whatever this thing is, it gets worse when the snow falls. I noticed it last winter, and now it's happening again. When the snow comes, it becomes more active. I had a really strange experience back in November 2020 that I still think about. I was camping with my family in Michigan, right on the shore of one of the Great Lakes. Our campsite was set up between the water and this dense forest area. It was during that blood moon in November, which made everything look kind of creepy and red. I saw this creature that reminded me of what people describe as a crawler. But honestly, I'm not totally sure if that's what it actually was. Some things about it matched up with those descriptions, but it also had some weird features I haven't heard other people mention when they talk about crawlers. The moon was maybe halfway up in the sky at that point, still rising over the lake. I know that's a weird way to describe the time, but that's the best I can explain it. Everyone else had already gone to sleep in their tents, so it was just my mom and I sitting by the campfire, having one of those late-night conversations. We were in the middle of talking about something when I caught a glimpse of this pale figure in the corner of my eye. It was on all fours, positioned above these bushes near the edge of our campsite. The bushes weren't that tall. They came up to maybe my chest or shoulders, and I'm 5'11". So whatever this thing was, it had to be pretty big to be visible above them like that. It was standing behind the bushes, but even on all fours it was tall enough to see clearly over them. That alone was unsettling, but what really freaked me out was how it was moving. It wasn't crawling normally like an animal would. This thing was crawling upside down, with its chest and stomach facing up toward the sky instead of down toward the ground. And its face, God, I can't stop thinking about it. Even though its body was upside down, the face looked right side up somehow. Like if you imagine it standing upright on two legs, the face would actually be upside down. It doesn't make sense, but that's what I saw. The face itself had those dark, empty holes for eyes that people describe when they talk about crawlers. But this one also had a smile. This wide grin stretched across its face. Behind that smile was the same black emptiness as the eye holes. Just pure darkness, like there was nothing inside. When I first spotted it out of the corner of my eye, the strange thing was that I didn't actually see it move into position. It was more like it just suddenly appeared there. Like 1 second I'm looking at empty bushes, and the next second this pale figure is just standing there. I genuinely don't know if it moved there really quickly, or just materialized out of nowhere. That bothered me, because I'm usually pretty good at catching movement in my peripheral vision, especially at night, when you're naturally more alert. Here's the part that really confuses me though. I didn't feel scared at all. Actually, when I fully turned to look at it, I started laughing. And to this day, I have absolutely no idea why that was my reaction. I'm pretty desensitized to weird stuff like this. I grew up in a household where we talked openly about the supernatural and occult. It was just part of life, So the idea of actually seeing something paranormal doesn't send me into a panic like it probably would for most people. It's more like curiosity mixed with fascination, I guess. Now I know what some people might be thinking. Was I just hallucinating? I do deal with some health issues, so it's a fair question. But I know for a fact that what I saw was real because my mother still backs me up on this to this day. Whenever I bring it up during our phone calls, she remembers it clearly. And actually just recently, I learned something that makes this whole thing even more unsettling. We weren't even looking at the same creature that night. She had seen one with the same description, but hers was positioned further back in the forest, behind where I was sitting. Meanwhile, the one I saw was behind her, near the bushes. They were each slightly off to our sides, not directly behind us. So that means there were at least two of these things out there, both actively watching us at the same time, and they both witnessed me randomly laughing at one of them, which in hindsight seems like a really stupid reaction.
So, just for some background, I'm from a pretty small town in the Midwest. Everything is super normal and boring most of the time. At least, nothing like what I'm about to tell you has ever happened here before, as far as I know anyway. This whole thing took place back in the fall of my 7th grade year, so that would have been around 2016 or 2017, I think. It's been a few years now, so some of the details are a little fuzzy, but I definitely know that I saw something that day. I just can't say for sure what it actually was. It still confuses me when I think about it. "Kylie!" my mom yelled up the stairs to my room. She was standing in front of the hallway mirror, getting ready to go out. As she clipped in one of her gold earrings, she started explaining the situation. "Your dad and I are heading out for the night," she said, now working on her other earring. "Do you mind taking the dog for a walk before we leave?" I just nodded without really saying anything, and honestly, I didn't mind at all. I grabbed the leash from where we keep it by the front door and started clipping it onto our dog's collar. Meanwhile, my mom just kept on talking. She was going into all these details about where they were going, what restaurant they picked, who they might run into there. The usual parent stuff. I was only half listening, if I'm being honest. It was late November, so it got dark pretty early. By the time my mom finally finished talking and I had the leash properly attached, the sun had already set completely. The dog was wagging his tail and pulling a bit, excited to go out like always. I closed the front door behind me and immediately got hit with this wave of chills. Part of it was definitely from the cold. It was pretty freezing out. But there was something else too. The atmosphere just felt weird. I looked around and realized there wasn't a single person outside. Complete silence except for the sound of our footsteps. "It's not that late, is it?" I said to my dog, like he was going to actually answer me or something. He just kept walking, totally unbothered. We had only made it about halfway down my street when my dog suddenly stopped in his tracks. He put his nose right down to the ground and started sniffing intensely at something. I have no idea what it was. Probably just some interesting smell or whatever dogs find fascinating. While I stood there waiting for him to finish his little investigation, I looked up at the empty road stretching out in front of us. And that's when my brain decided to be super helpful and remind me of this really dumb, scary video my friend and I had watched during class one day. We were supposed to be doing work, but instead we were watching creepy videos on our phone, trying to scare ourselves like idiots. In the video, someone was walking their dog at night. just like I was doing right now. They looked up at a stop sign, and there was this creepy woman literally standing on top of the stop sign, just staring down at them with this blank expression. It had freaked us out so bad. I felt my heart beat a little faster as I stared at the stop sign. Okay, there's no one there. Obviously, I said to myself, trying to sound confident. I forced myself to look away from the big red sign and back down at my dog, who was still sniffing away like nothing was wrong. And that's when my heart completely stopped. Like, I swear I felt it drop into my stomach. So I'm going to try my best to describe what I saw, because honestly, it was the most terrifying thing I've ever seen in my life, and I still have trouble putting it into words. There was this figure, and it was looking directly at me. It was huge. I'm talking like 8 or 9 feet tall, maybe even taller. The whole thing was just this dark, shadowy black figure, like a silhouette but 3-dimensional, if that makes sense. It had 2 legs that were impossibly tall and thin, like sticks almost. The arms were even worse. They were so freakishly long that they reached all the way down to the ground, but they were just as skinny as the legs. The body itself was kind of round, but not in a normal way. And then there was this long, thin neck that stretched up from the body. But here's the part that really messed me up. The head had no face. Not like it was too dark to see or anything, but somehow I could feel it staring at me. I know that sounds impossible, but I swear I could feel its attention on me. I was absolutely frozen with pure terror. I tried to pull my dog to get us out of there as fast as possible, but she wouldn't budge. She was completely frozen too, just standing there like a statue. So without thinking, I yelled out loud at my dog, "Move! Come on!" The second the words left my mouth, I realized what a massive mistake I had just made. The thing heard me. I watched as it shifted, turning its attention fully toward where I was standing. Even though it had no face, no eyes, I could somehow tell it was looking directly at me now. And then it started moving toward us. Oh my God, the way it moved. I can't even describe it properly. The best way I can explain it is like watching a drunk person trying to walk across a tightrope. All wobbly and swaying side to side, but somehow still moving forward. Its long arms were swinging loosely, almost dragging on the ground. But despite how awkward it looked, it was getting closer. Pure adrenaline kicked in. I didn't even think. I just ran. I yanked the leash so hard that my dog had no choice but to start running with me. We cut straight through my neighbor's yard, jumping over their little garden border. I didn't care about staying on the sidewalk or being polite. I just needed to get away from that thing as fast as possible. The grass in their backyard was all wet and muddy from the recent rain. My shoes kept slipping with every step. I was trying so hard to keep my balance, but then my foot slid out from under me completely and I went down hard. I hit the muddy ground with a painful thud, my hands and knees getting covered in cold, wet mud. My dog's leash had slipped from my hand when I fell. Without even thinking, I twisted my whole body around to look behind me, my heart absolutely racing. It was closer. So much closer than before. Maybe only like 30 feet away now. Oh God, oh God, oh God, I kept repeating under my breath. I scrambled to grab my dog, scooping her up in my arms in one frantic motion. She wasn't that big, but she felt so heavy in that moment. I reached my back door and practically threw both of us inside, slamming it shut behind me. My parents came running over to me immediately. Thank God they hadn't left yet. They thought someone had tried to hurt me or something. My dad didn't even hesitate. He ran straight outside to look. I sat there on the floor for the next few minutes, just sobbing uncontrollably. I tried my best to explain to my mom what had just happened, but I could barely get the words out between crying. A few minutes later, my dad walked back in through the back door. He looked confused and concerned. "There's no one out there," he said simply. Ever since that night, I've had really bad problems with anxiety and depression. To be fair, it might have nothing to do with what I saw, but I have to think at least a small part of it came from the pure terror I felt that day.